Kicking off the list at number 10, Souvenir Symbiote. So during the events of 1984's Secret Wars, Spidey came across a symbiote while on Battleworld. In issue 7, Spider-Woman makes her grand entrance, and Peter Parker reacts in his usual manner. I mean, one of his first thoughts is to sue her for infringing on his shtick, but he clocks that she just tossed a boulder as easily as he could, so maybe there's more behind her than meets the eye. In the next issue, he gets an up-close personal look at this new black suit Spider-Woman was rocking, and now we have a new costume for Spidey, and he loves it. He feels stronger, he feels quicker, and he's even impressed by the mechanics of the suit's ability to change. So while it all seemed like the perfect aid in this massive battle, Peter questioned why his new suit was so different after all. Oh well, he says, and then he returns to Earth with his new suit that just happens to activate his Spidey sense. And we all know that there was much more to this suit than we thought. You gotta leave things where you find them, Pete. You never know, they might just be, I don't know, an alien race. And before we go on to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a like on this video because it helps the channel out a lot over here. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to some more Spider-Man mistakes. Number 9, I am Spider-Man? Yeah, super identities are meant to be super secret, okay? So when Tony Stark announced that he was Iron Man on the big screen, I mean, sure, it was a cool moment, but since then, there have been numerous people trying to take him down. During the events of Civil War issue 2, Spider-Man decides to take a page out of Tony's book and announces to the world who the web-slinger really was. So later on, we see a bullet that was aiming for MJ, but ended up hitting Aunt May instead, resulting in one of the best Spider-Man arcs ever, the Back in Black storyline. So while it's cool to see Peter rage out and get payback wearing nothing but a polo and cool pants, all that pain could have been avoided if you just kept your mask on and your mouth shut. Number 8, The Deal with the Devil. Next up on our list, we have One More Day. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. We see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil, Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, that bullet hit Aunt May, which I just talked about, but that's not the end of it. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying from said bullet. So MJ adds to this massive pitch. So basically what ends up happening is that the world will forget about Peter's identity. Aunt May will live, but in order for that to happen, MJ and Peter never got married. Kind of like in Shrek 4, for all the 9 people that watch Shrek 4. So they hug one final time and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it. And that fast, all that backstory was just wiped out at the turn of one page. And readers at this point were also forced to suffer and join alongside this horrible end to this horrible deal. Number 7, Homesick. So now is a time more than ever when we have to be careful about spreading any virus, right? So you would think when Peter gets bitten during, say, I don't know, a zombie apocalypse, he would stay as far away from his loved ones as possible. In Marvel's Zombies Army of Darkness, we see our heroes run into Ash Williams, traveler between worlds. And he's arrived with the Necronomicon warning him that the army of the dead will rise in this world. So Peter sees this firsthand beside Ash, and he decides he's not going to let any more innocents die on his watch. And then in the next issue, after being bit himself, Peter pretends to munch on Hawkeye's brains before making a daring escape. Not a bad idea. So he gets Ash to safety, explaining why he's still a human being. And then Spidey decided to go home and make sure that May and MJ were okay with this bite and first-hand experience as to what happens. And Peter's newfound appetite starts to kick in. You should have stayed away, Peter. This went from bad to worse real quick. Number 6, not worth the fight. So we have Peter Parker, but this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe, which is my personal favorite. Wonder why. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. And at the start of this issue, he reflects on how much he loved his newborn daughter, saying he wanted to spend every waking moment with her and MJ. But he had other responsibilities. At least he thought he did. His words, not mine. So when May was 2 years old, he got into a fight with the Green Goblin and ended up losing a leg because of it, ending his days as the web-slinger. Now it's great in one way because we get to see May Parker rise to the occasion and put on the suit herself, and she's totally badass while she does it. But to think how differently their lives would have been had Peter have just retired and, I don't know, focused on his family, it would have been a lot different. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Let's just hope she comes across a, I don't know, leg dealer. Number 5, too much fun. I mean, sure, saving people can be a blast, swinging through the air, doing flips, talking the entire time to bad guys, but when you find yourself totally comfortable in any job, that's when mistakes happen, when you're not paying full attention. And we see this unfold in a brutal way in Spider-Man issue 17, titled At the Hands of Thanos. So he's going over the mental checklist of things to do in his Spider-Man day, like pick up Mary Jane, and no, not that kind. Fill up on web fluid, you know, usual Spidey stuff. When suddenly a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that this is just another walk in the park for him. He saves them, but the cooling machine falls and then explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air, killing Peter Parker. Now, believe me, that sounds terrible and all, but it gets worse. Yeah. Death isn't the end, and especially in the world where Thanos is around. He meets Peter in the afterlife and makes him watch as a mother yells in agony over the loss of her child during that same explosion. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the woman and her daughter, but he didn't even save the kid. I mean, maybe if you weren't so focused on the barbecue sauce, things would have turned out differently. I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know. Number 4, a helping hand. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers help during a project. I mean, giving them a hand though, literally, could end up pretty bad. So in the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion during a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. And as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors becomes a lizard man. And no, not like a lizard man. He becomes a lizard man. Like he's a giant lizard. Sorry, what happened? I mean, sure, lizards can grow back their tails easily, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage, the brain can alter as well. So his story arc begins with The Amazing Spider-Man 6, if you want to see that nightmare take place. Number 3, silence is golden. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question, because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's attracted to her, and she digs the webhead as well. I mean, look at him, who doesn't? All that confidence, all that lankiness, you gotta. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's actually less interested. Come on, Pete, you gotta play it cool. Be that mysterious guy. Number 2, the spider or the man. We now go to Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963. The issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them off your hands gladly if you wanna just, toss those to the side, sure. So he thinks it's a great idea to drink the solution that he's had that would get rid of his superpowers. Just in case he wanted to, I don't know, get rid of superpowers for some reason. For Gwen, he says, before downing the mix. And as you could have guessed, it doesn't work at all. Well, kind of. I mean, he grows 4 extra arms, so, take that what you will. Not like this, he says. Oh yeah, homemade vaccine for the win. And finally, number 1, not my problem. In a list full of mistakes, I think it's only fair to end on the mistake that haunts Peter the most. After letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his Uncle Ben's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this tremendous loss, especially not having parents in the first place, but he was responsible for letting this thug get away, and he honestly just let it happen. And it all takes place in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. Oh yeah, we see this mess go down right here. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds in a sassy way with, "Sorry, pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1. That means me." Sounds like a great plan, Pete. So how did that end up again?
Coming in at number 10, we have Spider-Wolf. Now, not a whole lot is known about this version of Spider-Man or his origin other than that he hails from Earth 13,989, a universe that is a little bit more gothic and assumed to be home to a number of werewolves. Now, the Spider-Man of this universe is no exception, but you probably already guessed that based off of his appearance alone. Going by the name Spider-Wolf, he has all the normal powers you would normally associate with Spider-Man, combined with the strength and the speed of a werewolf, which, as one can imagine, would make him incredibly powerful and a little bit scary to be around. Realizing this, the villain Karn sought out to defeat Spider-Wolf before he was recruited by the heroes of the Spider-Verse, as he could have been one of the Spider Army's most powerful allies. Karn is successful in taking him out for good before moving on to the other Spider-Folk in hopes of outsmarting the Spider Army. Created by Dan Slott, this is unfortunately all we know about this version of Spider-Man. Maybe we'll see him again in the future, who knows, but why not check him out for yourself in their first and last appearance in 2015's Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 11. Number 9, we have Man-Spider. Now, there have been multiple iterations of Man-Spider throughout the years, such as the one that appeared in 1982's Marvel Fanfare number 1, when Spider-Man was exposed to a machine that turned people into primitive monsters, making him the Man-Spider, or in 1971's The Amazing Spider-Man number 100, when Peter tried to cure himself of his powers, but instead mutated them further, giving him 6 arms. I want to focus on Peter Parker, who is Earth 6078, because although his story isn't dark full of murder, it is dark as in he loses what makes him the lovable hero. Now in this iteration, Peter gains his powers in a similar manner to ours, but Aunt May dies in an accident instead of Uncle Ben. This, for some reason, leads Peter to reveal his powers to his uncle, asking him to be his showbiz manager. And needless to say, like many talented folk, Peter ended up getting a very big head and started neglecting his duties as a hero, showing off his powers for fame and profit instead, while other heroes took care of the villains. Now this caused some serious strain on his relationship with Uncle Ben, and it eventually got to the point where they stopped talking, and Peter just sends him money now out of habit to feel less guilt. Check out this sad excuse of a Spider-Man in his first appearance in 2006's Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man number 8. Number 8, the Imperfect Spider-Man. Coming to us from the critical flop Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects, we have Earth's 50,701's Peter Parker, and from what we see, he is basically Earth 616 Peter Parker with a bit of a darker twist. Now if you're not familiar with the plot of this video game from 2005, that is absolutely okay. You did not miss very much, and it was not a good game at all. In the story mode, we see Spider-Man, the Thing, Wolverine, and Elektra captured and injected with a drug developed by an alien scientist that corrupted them and turned them into bloodthirsty killers. The now brutally violent and eager to fight heroes face off against each other in a Coliseum type battle. Thankfully, it didn't last long before Spider-Man was able to fight the drug and escape, leading the fight against a group called the Imperfects that had been infected with the same drug. Now, obviously they come out on top because it would make for a pretty terrible story if they didn't. Although this game was a massive flop, it did spin off into a very interesting series called Marvel Nemesis The Imperfects, and within 6 issues they did a better job of explaining exactly what happened in that universe. So if you're curious, check out this limited run for yourself, or honestly, if you're a fan of bad video games and you still have a GameCube lying around, maybe try and find the game. Number 7, Spider-Cyborg. On the apocalyptic Earth 2818, operating in the year 2099 AD, we have a slightly darker version of Peter Parker who, alongside his spider abilities, gains some cybernetic enhancements as well. Equipped with cybernetics covering most of his body, giving him stronger legs, metallic claws, enhanced vision, and even a sonic cannon for an arm, this Spider-Man does not come to play. Essentially, Spider-Cyborg was the perfect combination of Marvel Spider-Man and DC Cyborg, making him into one of the most powerful heroes in the Spider-Verse. Now, unfortunately, like many of the other strong alternate Spider-Men, Spider-Cyborg was immediately targeted by the villain Karn due to the threat that he posed. However, the superior Spider-Man appeared just in the nick of time and defeated the villain. Joining forces with the superior Spider army, Spider-Cyborg attempts to defeat Karn alongside the other Spider heroes, but is eventually destroyed by Deimos when the Inheritors invaded their home base on Earth 928. Now that's all we know about this Peter Parker, which is kind of disappointing because he definitely has a badass backstory, otherwise he wouldn't have so many cybernetic enhancements. If you know anything more about this character, well, let me know in the comments below, but in the meantime, why not check out his first appearance in 2014 Superior Spider-Man number 33. Number 6, Spider-Side. Believing himself to be the real Peter Parker, this Spidey clone was specifically engineered by the Jackal to kill the real Peter Parker, Ben, Kane, and Mary Jane. As a clone, he possesses many of the same abilities the real Peter has, such as superhuman strength, speed, and wall crawling, and spider senses, but what really sets him apart is his complete control over his molecular structure. With this ability, Spider-Side is able to extend his limbs, shapeshift, control the density of his body, and so much more. He actually uses this to simulate the artificial webbing used by Spider-Man by turning parts of himself into semi-liquid and just flicking it around. Adopting the name Spider-Side after the Jackal jokingly said that this Peter would commit mass Spider-Side for him, he actually followed through and once released a toxin in the air that killed 2,600 people across the state of Pennsylvania. Later, Skyer removes his clone degeneration factor after he betrays the Jackal, and good thing he does because that kept him alive for a little bit longer until he eventually fell off the roof of the Daily Bugle and was put in a stasis chamber, preventing him from ever being a threat again. First appearing all the way back in 1995 as Spider-Side in New Warriors number 61, check out this clone's short run as part of the Spider family for yourself. Number 5, Peter Parker, Earth 70,237. Many years into the future, we get a glimpse into the life of a retired Spider-Man who now spends his days working in a flower shop. MJ has already passed away due to radioactivity from what I guess I'll refer to as Peter's lovin'. You probably all know what I'm talking about, and there are actually no more heroes or villains around as a new merciless police force known as the Rammed control the city. J. Jonah Jameson of all people is actually the one to convince Peter to take up the mantle of Spider-Man once again to free the city from the Rammed. However, this is proven to be a very difficult task, as Mayor Waters does whatever he can to stand in his way. Facing off against the elderly Sinister Six, Peter learns to conquer his demons and truly begins his triumphant return as the friendly webhead. As he is a bit older than most Spider-Men, his reflexes are a little bit rusty and he is more vulnerable to attacks despite having his superhuman durability. After an all-out battle with Rain and Venom, who turned out to be Mayor Waters' assistant, Peter comes out victorious and the world goes back to the way it should be, full of heroes and villains. This version of Peter doesn't get to enjoy the return of heroes for long as he is murdered by Deimos, having his head crushed by Mary Jane's tombstone. If you're interested, check out this alternate Spider-Man in 2007's Spider-Man Reign #1. Number 4. Web-slinger. Originating from Earth, spelled E-U-R-T-H, there was once a young boy who was fascinated by spiders, and as a young man, he dared the journey into the mysterious Web Wood, a place filled with mysterious beings, to meet the mysterious Widow of the Web, because he really just wanted to know more about spiders. Impressed by him, she used her magical abilities to give him all the powers of the Spider Kingdom with one condition attached. He could never use the powers for his own interest. Now, these powers weren't really too much to write home about considering spiders don't have too much going on for them. He really just gained extra limbs and web generating abilities. Not long after, his uncle was in trouble and the boy ended up using his powers to save him, which really angered the widow, causing her to curse the boy. From that day forward, he lived out his life as a monstrous looking spider-human hybrid. Deciding to isolate himself from society, the boy took up the name Web-slinger and became the guardian of Webwood. However, despite all the good he does as Web-slinger, he is still seen as no better than the criminals he fights due to his monstrous appearance. Give his story a read for yourself in 2000's Avatar: Covenant of the Shield #2. Number 3, we have Spider-Man Noir. Raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben during the Great Depression, this Peter was raised to believe that good could triumph over evil no matter what. Now, gaining his powers after an antique spider statue breaks open and he is bit by a horde of spiders, he awakens the next day with these arachnid-like abilities, such as being able to shoot organic webs from his wrists, spider senses, and of course the signature superhuman abilities of every Spider-Man. Equipped with his signature Spider-Man Noir suit modeled after his uncle's World War I airman uniform, Peter stealthily moves about in the shadows, taking down baddies with his spider powers and revolvers. This Peter is pretty interesting because in the beginning of his career, he seemed to have no problem killing villains, killing the Vulture before he could murder his Aunt May. But later on he seemed to grow conscious and instead relied more on his powers than on his firepower. As a member of the Superior Spider Army, we saw him stationed on Earth 928, and he was a fairly key member of the war until he was very badly injured by Bricks and Bora, and had to kinda sit the rest of it out and do whatever he could from behind the scenes. Outside of that storyline, we have seen him fight the likes of his Earth's Norman Osborn and the Chameleon, and we even got to see him in the animated movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where he was voiced by Nicolas Cage. Now, if you're wondering why I included him on this list today since he doesn't really have a dark attitude to the world, here's why. My reasoning is because he literally grew up during the Great Depression, one of the darkest times in human history, and had to deal with some pretty dark subject matter while fighting the urge to succumb to it. So, I highly recommend you check out Spider-Man Noir for yourself in his first appearance in 2009's Spider-Man Noir #1. Coming in at number 2, we have Last Stand Spider-Man. Now, this version of Spider-Man is a possible future Peter Parker that we get to see thanks to Madam Web. In this future, Peter kills Kraven the Hunter to avenge the deaths of Kane and Mattie Franklin, and this sort of flips some switch in Peter because from that point on, he was much darker and deadlier. Adopting a new costume and title as an anti-hero, this version of Spider-Man is kicked out of the Avengers for good and winds up hurting his loved ones so badly, leaving him all alone with no one to worry about. All of his quote-unquote heroic deeds do eventually catch the attention of the police, and he goes on the run as a fugitive. Years later, as an old man, Peter visited his Aunt May's grave, aware that his younger self was actually hiding in the shadows watching his every move. Peter was confronted by the NYPD, and though he was given the choice to surrender and admit to his crimes, he refused and fought against them until he was shot down and killed. Now, I know we've talked about darker versions of Peter that are okay with killing and whatnot, but what sets Last Stand apart is that he seems he eventually realized what he was doing was probably not the best, and he felt the only way to atone for his sins was to actually die. Now, I highly recommend you check the story out for yourself because it is a great read, so head on over to 2003's Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, number 58. And finally, number 1, we have Peter Parker Earth 8351. Known as Assassin Spider-Man, this universe's Peter Parker becomes an assassin working alongside Wolverine. Leaving basically all aspects of his old life behind, including his longtime girlfriend Mary Jane, this Spider-Man is the complete inverse of his 616 counterpart. We later find out during the events of Edge of the Spider-Verse that Peter left his old life behind to protect his loved ones, as he states that with great power comes great responsibility and even greater enemies. Shown to be always serious, lacking his signature quips and jokey demeanor in battle, likely because he has no problem coping with the situation like his mainstream counterpart, this Spidey has shown no qualms about killing and does whatever it takes to get the job done. Now, this is likely due to his friendship with Wolverine, having adapted to his personality to better fit their job style. Having received formal training to hone his skills, this Peter possesses highly refined versions of the Spidey powers we all know and love. the most impressive being his spider senses, which is honed so much that he just seems to know things, even to the point that he knows what's going on before his opponent could think about it. So beating him is nearly impossible to do thanks to this precognition. He's also a master at hand-to-hand combat, able to defeat Black Widow with ease, and a master marksman, able to use any gun he gets his hands on. Added as a member of the Superior Spider-Man's Superior Spider Army, he alongside the other Spider-Men of the multiverse take on Karn. However, he is unfortunately defeated by the likes of Deimos' clone. Appearing for the first time in 2008's What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine #1, why not check this cold webhead out for yourself?
Kicking off the list at number 10, put on a show. Okay, Peter's life is pretty balanced. I mean, he takes selfies for the Daily Bugle, gets a little bit of cash, gets thrown off a building, has to fight a giant lizard, you name it. With Peter's life, his superhero and work go hand in hand. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 4, released back in 1963, we see Peter and he had just finished laying out Sandman, but he forgot to snag a couple of photos of the action. He didn't take any selfies, which is the worst. It's like when you blow candles out on your cake and then your mom's like, nope, you blinked, light them up again. Gotta keep trying this, it's for the scrapbook, let's go. Then you're like, I'm tired. So Peter grabs sand, like just sand off the ground, tosses it up in the air, and then punches through the sand. He's like, yeah, people are gonna buy this, it's the Sandman. And then people do buy it. What a liar. He comes back in all cool, out of breath, like, good people, you can breathe easy. Meanwhile, his Instagram is just popping off with likes. God, what a liar. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. You gotta get clout. You gotta get that super clout. And before we list off some more of Peter's dark days, if you guys could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at the studio. If we get enough likes, they won't kill me. Number 9, giving away Edith. Following the events of Avengers Endgame, aka the Snappening, we see Peter Parker trying to move on in a very new world, while mourning the loss of a co-worker and father figure that is Tony Stark. He wants to just live a normal life. He wants to go away on a trip with his friends and not have any moons hucked at him from any titans. So after trying to ghost Nick Fury in the process, he's handed down Edith, Tony's sweet AI glasses. After a mix-up that almost had his classmate executed by one of Tony's drones, he decides that the handsome, caped, random Jake Gyllenhaal that just came out of nowhere as Mysterio is a safe bet for the tech. I mean, he looks great in the glasses, but like, it's Jake Gyllenhaal, he's gonna look great in anything. But come on, Peter, you think after toying with Stark's suit years before that maybe it's a little bit too much responsibility? I'll get into that later. Number 8, the Betty Brant affair.
Hey, Betty.
So Betty is a staff member at the Daily Bugle. She's been played by Elizabeth Banks in the Tobey Maguire trilogy, and Angourie Rice plays a younger version of her in the new MCU Tom Holland version. Believe it or not though, Betty was actually the first woman that Peter was attracted to when he first started selling photos to the Daily Bugle. So they dated for a bit, but ultimately it didn't work out. No biggie, it happens. Cut to years down the road, Peter's marriage proposal didn't work out too well. She said no, and Betty's marriage to Ned at this point was also not working out. She was having a bit of a rough patch. So she went to Peter for some comfort, and then the obvious happened. She's still married, Pete. Don't do it.
Your shots are so good.
I'd love to shoot you sometime.
Peter Parker. Peter.
Number 7, more secrets. Marriage is a big deal, as we kind of just mentioned. I mean, maybe in comic books they happen way more often than they should. So many characters get divorced every other day, I swear. Like, divorce lawyers must make millions of dollars in the comics. Holy shit. But the whole point of a proper marriage is to have everything out there on the table, right? You have to know everything about your significant other. No secrets. I mean, sure, if you're Spider-Man, you have to keep some things to yourself, like the fact that you're Spider-Man. Because maybe your friends will go and say something and then the Green Goblin will hear and then he'll blow up your house or something, or toss your aunt out of a window. I get it. But MJ already knew about Peter Parker being Spider-Man. Of course she did. So right after he had resumed taking on the mantle of the webhead again, he failed to fill in MJ. Yeah, he told her he'd quit and then he didn't tell her that he was, not quitting anymore. Like, dude, she already knew before. Stop making up lies. What are you, Walter White? It's very obvious you're up to something. Everybody's onto it. Number 6, blackmail for a date. So that One More Day storyline that has been mentioned before on our channel that I'll talk about a little bit more at the end of this list is a pretty pivotal moment in Spider-Man comics. So after this deal had taken place, Spider-Man was now single and ready to mingle. So in Miss Marvel issue 34, we see a new Peter bump into Miss Marvel. And she's in the middle of this sketchy and totally unplanned mission, as Peter puts it, with the CIA. And she can't use her powers, and she's currently on the run from Norman Osborn, who turned S.H.I.E.L.D. into Hammer at this point. It's wild. So bumping into Peter was pretty ideal at this point. He webbed her to safety, all the while they bickered at each other trying to figure out what's going on, what they're up to, what their real intentions are. And then Carol thanks him with a super knee, bam, right between the legs, and then explains to Peter that she needs his help, which is a good order. That's how you do things in that order. I need help. Can you drive me to the airport? If I do this, says Pete, then I want a date with you, which we see come to fruition 13 issues later. So when Carol responded surprised, he even acknowledged that he didn't realize he was gonna say that until it came out. Cool, maybe it just slipped out. But then once she leaves and agrees to it, he's like, yo, I think I just got a date, score. Come on, Pete. A lot of come on Pete's in this, eh? A lot of just what are you doing, dude? Number 5, truce? Question mark? So at some point it's fair to make a truce, okay? Maybe the conflicts just don't have realistic expectations, and then both parties are like, you know what, this has gone on way too long, let's just call it, no hard feelings. Bam. Like Spider-Man 3, when Pete and Harry teamed up to save the day against Venom and Sandman. That was a great moment. Moviegoers were thrilled to see the end of Bad Boy James Franco and Bad Boy Tobey Maguire. Like, just stop dancing and snapping at people. Just fight. I don't know. But in the comics, he made a pretty questionable truce with Venom. And it all happens in the Amazing Spider-Man 375. Spider-Man's parents get kidnapped by Venom. So he's like, no problem. I'll just roll up with your ex-wife. What's up? Let's make a deal. What do you got? So Spider-Man saved her life, so in return, a truce was to be made. I mean, sure, this was the kickoff to Venom becoming an anti-hero, and then he can have his own run, but also, it's Venom, you know?
Christineth, are you stupid or are you deaf?
Number 4, the fairy incident. Spider-Man Homecoming. Okay, so after intimidating Aaron Davis with his cool, deep voice, Spider-Man figured out the next move for the arms dealers. So Pete decides to take matters into his own hands and prove that he's worthy of being a suitable Avenger. See, this was right after Tony recruited him to help take down Team Cap in Civil War. So he was warm, he got a taste of the action, and now he wants to do more. That's fair, that's why we love Spider-Man. So the Staten Island Ferry was the next location for the Vulture's arms deal to go down. Let's do it, we got the intel, we're rolling in. So he says some quips, webs a few bad guys up, but the Vulture's Chitauri weapon was just too much for Peter to handle, resulting in the ferry to split in half. Right down the middle too, not even like Titanic. So in a last attempt to keep the civilians safe, he tries to hold on to both sides, which is a sick moment. It's kind of like a homage to other Spider-Man moments. It's great, but people are in danger. People are about to drown. There's like cars that are sinking. It's bad. And thankfully, with Iron Man's surprise arrival, the passengers were saved. Tony was pissed though. He had this whole setup. There was an inside operation, and then Spidey came in and blew it. And he didn't even tell Tony about what he was doing to make matters all the worse, which resulted in Tony taking back the Spider-Man suit. It's always the worst part, right after a breakup. You're like, fine, here's your nice sweater. God, I'm so cold now. Number 3, evil assassin Spider-Man. We go now to Earth 8351, where Spider-Man and Wolverine are training together in Alaska. Nice and cold. So they're trying to go rogue. So they're working on becoming stronger, and they're training, they're having a good time. Now, this Peter Parker, he's a bit more rough around the edges. Even his famous catchphrase is now slightly different. See, in this universe, it is, with great power comes great responsibility and greater enemies, which I like more. It's honest, it's definitely better. Doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's a step in the right direction. And it makes sense why he's going rogue. He's truly trying to protect his friends and family, and saying those few extra words at the end just reaffirms his only goal. So when they're attacked, Spider-Man tells Wolverine just to keep hitting people while he deals with a bad guy wielding not one, but 2 swords. So Spider-Man tries webbing him up, and the swords don't allow that. And Spider-Man even gets laughed at for attempting to do this. And Spider-Man says, you're right, that's not gonna work. Bam, shoots him in the face. Huh? They held off long enough until S.H.I.E.L.D. arrived. I mean, sure, this Spider-Man is a different version, but it's still Spider-Man, right? Like, regardless of the title on the front page, this is a moment most fans remembered long after the pages were closed. He like did a cool peace sign too, and then the bullets popped out of his wrist. It was cool. He's like, hey, smell this, bam. Smell this, why the fuck would he say that? Number 2, hit Mary Jane. Spectacular Spider-Man issue 226, we see Ben Reilly and Peter Parker, and the tension is high. They're trying to prove who the real Spider-Man is. It's during all the clone stuff. And they reach a conclusion that Ben Reilly is in fact the real Spider-Man. He is the real father. He is the father. Peter doesn't respond to this well at all. He's upset, obviously. He's watching his entire life basically get stolen in front of him. And then MJ tries to get in the middle, and cool everything down, and Peter instinctively just brushes her off, yelling to leave him alone. Now, you can't really brush somebody off of you when you can lift, I don't know, a bus. He's strong, he's really strong. So him just doing that in a matter of rage, she went flying. And to make matters somehow worse, she was pregnant. Yeah, she was pregnant. And he quickly knew he had messed up, saying, oh God, what have I done? What kind of man am I? I'll tell you what kind of man you are, Spider-Man. You're a guy who gets on a lot of lists of people getting in trouble. That's what you are. Kidding, you're a gem. Stop hitting people. And finally, number 1. The deal with the devil. I mentioned this earlier, now it's time to get into it. Look, sometimes Peter will try and do the right thing. Well, most of the time he'll do the right thing. But then life just gets even harder for him after that. And then he's presented with a new issue to face, and it's like an over and over again thing. It's just a nightmare. And then in 2007, starting with the Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, the storyline One More Day, it's exactly what might happen if you revealed your identity to the public. Following in the footsteps of Tony Stark in the Civil War II storyline, where Peter revealed his true identity in order to support the Superhero Registration Act. So giving out your last name to supervillains, cool, great idea, awesome, nothing bad's gonna happen at all. This of course resulted in Aunt May getting shot, and in order to save her life, he must make a deal with the devil, literally Mephisto. And in doing so, the world will also forget about Peter's true identity. Not a bad deal. The only catch is that Mephisto takes away the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane. And I don't mean a quickie divorce and he's like, hey, sign here, poof. No, I mean it never happened. The relationship is gone, and at the turn of a page, the marriage was just no more. All those memories, all those moments, gone just like that.
And a 10-8 Aunt May and Mary Jane. Okay, so technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man, but I'm gonna count it anyway because this is pretty damn messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from Evil Dead was actually what caused it. But after learning that the plague was actually like a bad thing, Peter ran home to get Aunt May and MJ the hell out of Dodge. But when he gets there, we get a good old case of protagonist syndrome and boom! Zombie Spider. He ends up becoming a zombie and eats the two most important people in his life. He also had a fractured jaw before becoming a zombie, so I'm sure you can imagine that this isn't a pretty sight, even by zombie standards. It may not be RP, but it was a version of Spider-Man, so it's fine. And at 9, Anna Marconi. Speaking of a version of Spider-Man, let's discuss the Superior Spider-Man and his fascination with Anna Marconi. Superior Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swapped with Peter, yet a piece of Peter still remained in his own body, which convinced Otto to end up becoming a hero, albeit a darker one. Doc Ock was up to some really shady stuff while pretending to be Peter, cause since Peter is young, handsome, in shape, and has actual women in his life, Otto tried his luck at getting MJ to sleep with him, but failed miserably. So, things weren't going that well. But then there's Anna Marconi, whom this Otto-Peter hybrid started dating. She had no idea what the real situation was going on inside that noggin, and while it's unclear if they ever actually hopped on the good foot and did the bad thing, it's obvious that things were at least heading in that direction. Otto was in love with her, which was a surprise since he even decided to give Peter back his body to save her, but it was still an absolutely horrific story, immoral, in the highest class of the word. It's creepy as hell and it makes me rethink all relationships. And at 8, interfered with surgery. In the same series as the Anna Marconi situation, the small bit of Peter that was left in his body was trying to regain control, for obvious reasons, because a super villain was piloting his bone mech with meat armor. This small bit of Peter though was at times able to interfere or even control Otto temporarily. One of these moments came in Superior Spider-Man number 8, where there was a device that was capable of wiping Pete from Otto's brain, but to get it he had to perform surgery on a little girl. However, Peter didn't think that Otto could do it, so he tries to stop Otto from even performing the surgery, while he has his Spider-Man mask on, may I add, and an additional face mask, so if evil Spider-Man can do it, so can you. Even still, trying to prevent the surgery to save a little girl's life is a pretty low moment for the Barnacle, even if it was filled with good intentions. Kind of. Those only power crystals, Actually, is that how it works? I don't know. I don't think like Topaz is gonna cure my depression or something. And in 7, scarring Harry Osborn. While Spider-Man 3 in and of itself is one of the most despicable things that Spider-Man has done, well, with the exception of that sweet dance scene, One of the most horrible things actually in the movie is during the final fight between Harry and Peter. Peter shows up at Harry's house wearing the black symbiote costume and is mad about Goblin Jr. being the reason that MJ left Peter. However, this fight is about more than that, since Harry still blames Peter for killing his father, and Peter is done trying to convince him. After wailing on him a little bit, Peter kicks Harry into the path of a rogue glider, sending him flying into a shelf of good old-fashioned pumpkin bombs. After some mental torment, he knocks Harry out against the wall, at least so he thinks. But in fact, Harry is awake, and as Peter is walking away, Harry decides to chuck a pumpkin bomb at Pete, who dodges it thanks to his spider sense, but then thanks to the symbiote throws it back at Harry, causing it to explode basically right next to his face. If it weren't for the Goblin Serum, Harry would definitely be dead, and honestly, even with it, I'm surprised that he survived. But you do have to admit, it was pretty damn cold, but Harry also did kind of deserve it. And at 6, assorted killings. For being a hero that has a strict no killing rule, Spider-Man has killed quite a few people, but perhaps most notably Logan's friend Charlie in the graphic novel Spider-Man vs. Wolverine from 1987. The plot of this is that both Wolverine and Spidey end up in Berlin for their own reasons, and as the title suggests, Wolverine and Spider-Man end up fighting each other, in a graveyard to be exact. The fight is actually a good one, with Spidey even having the mindset to kill Wolverine because Logan might kill him first. They don't know each other that well at this point. The fight ends only when a helicopter of bad guys shows up looking for Logan's friend Charlie. Wolverine wanted to help his friend stop killing, but now since this helicopter showed up, Wolverine wants to kill her quick, since, you know, they aren't going to. Which he doesn't actually have to do because Spider-Man does. After Charlie intentionally sets off his spider sense and gets a super powered spider punch to the face, killing her instantly. Halfway through into number 5, kissed Gwen's daughter. After learning that your father isn't actually your father, but rather your mother's ex who she cheated on with his worst enemy, what do you think you would do? Also, you're aging more rapidly because your real father has some form of goblin serum in his system that somehow passed on to you, but you only age up physically, so you're mentally 10 with the body of an adult. Yeah, you may want to skip this number. Since Pete and Sarah end up getting closer after fighting off dealers in Paris, but this was made even worse when they're in Paris without MJ, who Peter didn't bring for whatever reason. The thing is though, Peter thinks that this is entirely platonic. This just goes to show you that if your partner thinks that someone's trying to get with you, you should listen. Because lo and behold, Sarah ends up planting one on her almost dad, just as MJ shows up for a surprise visit. And I think the name of the storyline, Sins Remembered, is way too fitting and is definitely going to be seared into my brain now. God damn it. You thought that Gwen and Green Goblin was bad? Oh boy. And at 4, sold his marriage. After siding with Tony in the events of the first Civil War, Spider-Man has to reveal his identity to the world in order to continue fighting crime. And you know, since now every supervillain on Earth knows how to get to Spider-Man, Kingpin ends up attacking Peter at his home. He dodges the bullets, but they end up hitting Aunt May instead, putting her in critical condition. This is the start of the One More Day storyline, probably the most universally hated Spider-Man run of all time. Since in order to save Aunt May, Peter talks to Mephisto and ends up selling his marriage to MJ in order to save his aunt. So their entire marriage will get erased so that he can have at least one more day with his aunt. Aside from living with the consequences of your actions, because you know, that's not what heroes do. Which is also pretty goddamn horrible. You wanna know what else is pretty goddamn horrible? Like, MJ had to agree to it as well, or at least she had to say that she did. But like, seriously, if you're being realistic, okay, how many years does Aunt May really have left? Okay, like, honestly, not many. So selling your marriage to bring back your one foot in the grave aunt just seems like a not so even trade to me. I'm just saying, MJ's gonna be around for longer. You heard it right, ladies. I'd let my old aunt die for you. Hit me up. Getting close to the end into number 3, One Moment in Time. The One Moment in Time story comes after the One More Day story, and this seems to be the storyline that No Way Home is taking inspiration from. However, after saving Aunt May, Wilson Fisk ends up sending a hitman after MJ's Aunt Anna Watson, but the hitman, revealed to be Eddie Brock, ends up attacking Mary Jane. Peter takes the wounded MJ to Doctor Strange, who heals her, but Peter also insists that Doctor Strange performs a spell that causes everyone to forget that he's Spider-Man, because again, not living with the consequences of his actions. Strange contacts Iron Man and Mr. Fantastic for advice, and they end up agreeing with him eventually. They do, however, decide that nobody should remember who Peter is aside from Peter. Not Doctor Strange, not Tony, not Mr. Fantastic, not MJ. But Peter, being Peter, jumps out of his protective bubble and grabs MJ and pulls her in before the spell's complete. They wake up in a motel and Peter explains what happened. Mary Jane asks why he couldn't just let her forget, and then she explains that she she can't be with him because it's only a matter of time before somebody rips off his mask again and they go after her family, and that's a danger that she can't let happen. Back in the present though, Mary Jane also explains that he has to move on and find somebody who can be with him. Should've just let her forget it, man. Penultimately, in at number 2, hit Mary Jane. To get things straight, I understand that finding out that you're actually a clone and that the real Peter Parker has been living his life for the past few years as Ben Reilly because he thought he was the clone would be pretty earth-shattering, but nonetheless, it doesn't excuse this behavior. You may be under a lot of stress, but you never hit or take it out on your partner in any way whatsoever. No matter what gender you are or aren't, you just don't, okay? But Peter didn't get that memo for a minute, since in the Clone Wars storyline after finding this out, Peter and Ben are in the middle of a scrap. Mary Jane admittedly doesn't make the brightest move though when she attempts to break the two up, but Peter instinctively backhands her across the room, a moment we see referenced in Spider-Man 3 in the cafe that MJ works at. However, in the comic, Mary Jane was actually currently pregnant with his child, and while Peter does instantly regret this and is filled with shame and guilt, he runs away. He doesn't check on his pregnant wife. He flees and joins up with Jackal, so yeah. Not the finest moment there, dude. Finally, in at number 1, killed Mary Jane. I know I say I hate talking about this, but honestly, if I have to suffer through this knowledge, so does everyone else. It's like my own way of being a supervillain. In the Spider-Man Reigns storyline, it's revealed that Mary Jane is dead, but it's also revealed later on why she's dead, since she was married to Peter, and as I've mentioned, did eventually want to have kids with him. The thing is though, a radioactive spider biting your hand does more to a man than lets him stick to walls and perform incredible acrobatics. It also fills that man with radiation, and anything else he feels also gets filled with radiation, if you catch my drift. Whether you're role-playing a lab experiment or not, that's what ended up happening after all, since Mary Jane ends up dying of cancer thanks to the radiation that Peter was packing in those swimmers. Yeah, it's absolutely horrible, and while yes, it's a question that everyone had, it's not something we ever wanted an answer to, especially if this is the way that it was gonna go. And at 10, an affair. Now, Betty Brant got married in Amazing Spider-Man number 156 and headed off to Paris for a honeymoon that doubled as a work assignment for her and her new husband, reporter Ned Leeds. However, in Amazing Spider-Man issue 183, we see Peter propose to Mary Jane and her turn him down, which puts him in a pretty dark place, which means that when Betty shows up in Peter's apartment in Amazing Spider-Man 184, there are going to be some issues. However, Betty claims to have left Ned on their honeymoon, while also on assignment together. But here's the biggest kicker. She never told Ned that she was leaving him, but she still intends on sparking a romantic relationship with Peter, which he ends up shutting her down in number 186, telling her that he can't be with her. But she doesn't take no for an answer, and in issue 187 makes her own move and just goes for the kiss, saying, "Shut up darling, just kiss me." The next panel then cuts to a few hours later, which sparked the debate whether he and Betty actually ended up bumping more than lips. And then Ned ends up threatening to kill Peter if he doesn't stay out of Betty's life. So, yeah. And at 9, failed Gwen. There are multiple instances of Spider-Man failing Gwen Stacy, both in the comics and in the movies. The more recent moment being in Amazing Spider-Man 2 starring Andrew Garfield. In both instances, Gwen Stacy is killed thanks to the Green Goblin, although in the comics it was debated for ages whether or not Peter was to blame, since he could have been the reason her neck snapped. It was also debated whether or not she was dead before the plummet, but I think we can all agree that she fell for him. She fell head over heels. And this idea that it was Peter's fault was only added on to in The Amazing Spider-Man, since the only reason Gwen was there was because Peter couldn't stay away from her, because he didn't give his blood to Harry, and then because he was relying more on his webs than his physical ability as Spider-Man. But at least the Tobey Maguire version didn't end up having any issues with Gwen Stacy, right? Oh wait. And at 8, kissed Gwen. While the comic version and the second movie version ended up getting their Gwens killed, Tobey's version ended up saving his when she fell out of a building in Spider-Man 3. Doing this even earned him the key to the city. And while a lot of the bad things that Peter does in this movie can be written off as the symbiote, at this point, Peter hasn't gotten it yet. So, when at the ceremony, when he was going to get to the key to the city, he decided to go the extra mile and let Gwen kiss him while he was hanging upside down. That's entirely on him. Something that Mary Jane, his current girlfriend, who was also at the ceremony and knew his identity, didn't enjoy. Especially because firstly, that was like their kiss theme, because like it was the kiss that they had after he saved her in the first movie. And secondly, because she left J. Jonah Jameson's son at the altar for Peter, and then this man goes and kisses another girl right in front of her doing their thing. Yeah, that's a total dick move. That a horrible idea. As an empath, I know how MJ was feeling in that instance, but I really don't get why he thought that this was a good idea. Like, yeah, sure, the papers will love it, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea. You aren't even getting pictures of this to sell to JJ, so like, what's the point of pissing off your girl? Horrible move overall. And at 7, almost killed Shocker. The 90s animated series for Spider-Man has a lot going for it. I love the series and have watched it many times. In fact, I'm watching it right now again. But the things this Peter did while using the symbiote suit are kind of messed up. For instance, JJJ ends up putting up a bounty on him for accusations of thievery. But when people start using sonic weapons, he ends up trying to blow them up. There is literally a line where he says, "My suit has cruise control, but your suits have backpacks that blow up when they get wet." Yeah, well, he then breaks a fire hydrant to shower them with water, which basically would have killed them if they didn't run away. He also almost killed Shocker during their battle at the church, just before Brock becomes Venom and Peter loses the symbiote. He saves him just in the nick of time, but it's certainly not a good look for a show that will really only say destroy and not kill. Like, the Punisher comes in and they say lethal force, and then that's it. And then like one episode, Spider-Man says that the Spot doesn't look like a killer, but that's the only time they have anything close to the word kill. I mean, like, I get it, like it was the 90s and they didn't really go that dark, but still. And at 6, the Fairy. While attempting to stop a weapons deal, Spider-Man gets into a fight with a vulture that nearly destroys a ferry full of people in Spider-Man Homecoming. And while it was totally meant to be like the most innocent thing, it certainly wasn't a smart idea. Honestly, Spider-Man should have just thrown the weapon into the ocean as a way to stop it instead of webbing it onto the boat. But technically, I guess he didn't know what it could do, but it was also still firing on its own when no one was holding it, which should have been enough warning that this wouldn't end well. However, he webs an energy weapon to the ground and then it splits the ferry in half. He does his best to save it, but only ends up being 98% successful. Like, it was working until some dude gets a little too excited and starts clapping and breaking the webbing, which wouldn't really be Peter's fault. But then when the webs start to break, Pete just kind of like sits there and watches and doesn't really try to repair anything. He eventually jumps in to try to grab one web, but like plenty had broken before this, so he should have kept going. As soon as she said 98% successful, you go out and you do it again. Like, come on, bro. Halfway through into number 5, tried to kill Sandman. This is something from Spider-Man 3 that we could consider to be because of the symbiote. However, considering how Peter wanted to kill the guy he thought killed his uncle when he first got his powers, I don't think the symbiote has much to do with this instance of him wanting his uncle's killer dead either. Sure, he's a little more aggressive about it. Like, without the suit, he probably would have asked a couple questions first, but I think that ultimately the fact that he wanted his uncle's killer dead was the driving force behind this. I mean, like, the suit definitely made him like really go for it, but he wanted it. Obviously, he doesn't end up actually killing Marco, but he certainly thought he did. He was proud of it too, even telling Aunt May, who he won't even tell that he's Spider-Man to, despite not living at home anymore and her being attacked by enemies multiple times, and then getting mad at him when he runs off because he has some Spider-Manning to do. He really only snaps out of it when Aunt May tells him that what Spider-Man did was pretty messed up. But like, I feel like she kinda like knew. Like, she was like, yeah, that's up, man. Spider-Man shouldn't have done that. Do you think that this version of Aunt May knew that he was Spider-Man, or do you think that she was oblivious? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. In at 4, Broken Promise. Okay, spoiler alert for No Way Home, since I feel like I still need to give a warning about it, even though the movie was released last year. So for this and number 2, there's a Spider-Man No Way Home warning in effect. Okay, if you haven't seen it, go do that, because it's an amazing movie. But the ending had me wailing. So as we know in the climax of the movie, spoiler alert, at the Statue of Liberty, we see the multiverse crack open and everyone who ever knew that Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker is now coming through. So in an effort to stop this from happening, Peter tells Doctor Strange to cast a new spell, this time that makes everyone forget about Peter Parker, including Doctor Strange, his best friend, and his girlfriend. In this case being Ned and MJ, not Doctor Strange's best friend and girlfriend. Peter goes to say goodbye and tells his friends that he will find them and remind them of everything they've been through. MJ says that she loves him and then tells him to say it when he finds her after the spell. The spell is cast, and then Peter just doesn't remind MJ and Ned because he thinks that they're safer without him. While this ending is perfect and sets up a new trilogy where the main complaint of him being Iron Boy Jr. is gone, it still breaks my heart. It's like this is like the same thing that happens at the end of my favorite book. So yeah, the Broken Promise thing, on my list for sure. Getting close to the end, and in number 3, Threatened Kingpin. Spider-Man was in a weird place during the Civil War arc at Marvel Comics. After revealing his identity to the public, he was at odds with Tony Stark over the Superhuman Registration Act, which made Peter a wanted man. On the run, Peter, Aunt May, and MJ ended up hiding in a rundown motel while he was a fugitive. However, the Kingpin ended up hiring a hitman to put a hit on Spider-Man. It resulted in Aunt May accidentally being shot instead, leaving her critically injured. Peter would give her a blood transfusion, and while she was in a coma, he went after Wilson Fisk. Peter confronted the mob boss in a prison and gave him a fate worse than death. He defeated him in front of everyone. Peter beat the absolute living snot out of Kingpin, like absolutely to a pulp, but refused to kill him at the moment because he realized that a supervillain living with everyone knowing he can be beaten, especially Kingpin, was better than ending his life. But also mentioned that if Aunt May did die from this, he would come back and fill his lungs with webbing and watch him suffocate, which is incredibly dark, but also kind of makes sense. I'm surprised he didn't say something like, "I will pull your face off your body by just not stopping the sticking of my hand to your bald head." But hey, I guess that's just my thinking. That's what I would do. Penultimately, in at number 2, Bitter. Again, another spoiler warning for Spider-Man No Way Home. However, this time around, it isn't about the MCU Peter Parker, rather Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. Thanks to the multiverse and the return of the Amazing Spider-Man actor, we got to see how Andrew's Spider-Man went on after the death of Gwen Stacy. And while the writers wanted to focus on Tom's Spider-Man rather than the other two and not let them steal the show, which the actors agreed to, we still got some more story about where Andrew and Tobey went after their series completed. One such reveal was that Andrew's Peter stopped pulling his punches and got bitter, heavily implying that his Spider-Man ended up killing someone, be it intentional or not, which some have also linked to the Morbius trailer, since there is graffiti in one of the scenes with the word murderer spray painted over Sam Raimi's Spider-Man suit. However, that pose is also from a loading screen in Spider-Man PS4, so it's safe to assume that it's just a placeholder for the actual movie, potentially to prevent any spoiler about what happened to the Spideys after their movies concluded. Do you want to see an Amazing Spider-Man 3 where like he fights Venom or something? I don't know, let me know down below, I kinda do. And finally, into number 1, Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage isn't just the Spider-Man villain, he's actually an alternate version of Spider-Man. Hailing from one of the many Earths, this character was introduced in the 90s Spider-Man animated series. Again, my favorite Spider-Man animated series. This Peter's life was actually very similar to the main Spider-Man, except his version also lost Aunt May and developed a resentment for humanity. And then he had to deal with a clone, which definitely sucked. Until he and the clone learned that they didn't know who was actually the clone. Cause like, you know, the one going by Ben Reilly could have actually been the real Peter Parker. And this broke this version of Peter, who was actually still Peter. A Carnage symbiote from another universe actually ended up sensing this hatred and resentment for humanity, and through a portal created by Jonathan Ohm, it bonded with Peter, driving him even more insane, and then starting to call himself Spider Carnage. From my understanding, this character hasn't been seen since that final episode, but I still want him to like come back in some aspect because this is so messed up but so good. Please, like add this character to the MCU or let Andrew Garfield fight a version of the Carnage symbiote and then create Spider Carnage or fight off Spider Carnage or something, please. He wanted to fight an alien, so can we please do that? Please. Also, where's the pop figure? They came out with 90s Spider-Man pop figures, but not Spider Carnage? What the hell?
Almost let a little girl die in surgery. In Amazing Spider-Man number 700, Doc Ock switches minds with Spider-Man, sort of. Doc Ock, now in Spider-Man's body, is exposed to all of Peter's memories and experiences, and it definitely has an effect. He decides to become a superhero, calling himself the Superior Spider-Man. However, in the first issue of Superior Spider-Man, it's revealed that a portion of Peter is still residing inside of the body, and it has some control over Doc Ock's actions. So later in Superior Spider-Man number 8, the Superior Spidey finds a device that he can use to get rid of the last bits of Peter Parker that remain in his brain. However, in order to gain access to this device, he first has to perform surgery on a little girl. So this leads to a scene where Ghost Spider-Man is like in the background, basically trying to prevent Doc Ock from doing the surgery, knowing that Doc is going to finish off Peter Parker after he's successful. However, Peter does eventually relent and Doc succeeds in his surgery, but for a moment there it kind of seemed like Pete was ready to let a little girl die so that he could live. Not exactly Spidey's finest hour.
Number 9, killed MJ. So Peter's track record when it comes to loved ones isn't as bad as someone like Daredevil, but hey, it isn't great either. In alternate universes especially, Spider-Man has caused a lot of harm to those that he's loved, and I mean a lot. And even in the main continuity, his track record isn't so great. In the Marvel Zombies universe, Spider-Man was transformed into a zombie, and as this happened, felt the uncontrollable urge taking over him. He was like, I'm so hungry, I gotta eat people. He tried to tell his loved ones to get away from him, but it was too late, and he ended up not only killing, but full on eating both Mary Jane and his Aunt May. Of course, can we really blame Peter for this one? Not so much. He was a zombie and he wasn't really in control here. But knowing Peter, you can bet he likely reminisced and blamed himself continuously for this for days on end, even while he was a zombie. Because, you know, Peter just loves to blame himself for everything. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick little reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it. It really helps us out at the channel. And thank you if you've already done it.
Number 8. Allowed a kidnapping. In Amazing Spider-Man number 112, we see Spider-Man really worried about Aunt May. She's gone missing after Gwen Stacy gave her a hard time for meddling in Peter's life too much, and he spent most of the previous issue searching for Aunt May. In this issue, we see Spidey has become so distracted, he doesn't even notice this guy getting kidnapped nearby. What's worse, when Pete does notice this guy, who also notices him, he starts the classic Spidey monologue about how helping this poor slob will take hours. Hours he could spend searching for Aunt May. He actually leaves the guy to get kidnapped, saying, maybe someday I'll have the courage to face myself again. Damn, Pete, you could have easily stopped and saved this guy. If that wasn't bad enough, later on it turns out that Aunt May wasn't even missing, she just had a new job. Way to go, Spidey.
Number 7, worst boyfriend ever. I wish I could say this was a one-time instance, but this is one of the worst, most consistent things that we've seen from Peter Parker throughout all of his relationships. He's not only super awkward around the ladies, but also has a tendency to behave badly with his romantic partners as well. For one, Peter very rarely lets people in on his secret of being Spider-Man, which causes a lot of problems early on in relationships that usually end up causing a breakup before things get super serious. And you might be thinking to yourself, but wait a minute, Amanda, hasn't Peter Parker told Mary Jane before that he's Spider-Man? Yes, but she also apparently knew from like day one that he was Spider-Man, so I don't know if that even counts because she knew the whole time. But beyond that, he also says, thinks, and does kind of things that are just in general awful. He snapped at his partners, lied to them, gotten them into all kinds of danger, blamed them for things that weren't their fault, and even at times physically hit them. Like when Mary Jane tried to break up a fight between Peter Parker and his clone Ben Reilly, and in a mindless rage, he slammed her back, causing her to go flying into a wall. Also, Spider-Man is super strong, so even if he like flicked Mary Jane, I imagine that would be terribly painful. Oh, and she was also pregnant at the time with their child, which just makes it even worse.
Number 6. He almost robbed a jewelry store. Okay, I know this isn't supposed to be top 10 things Spider-Man almost did, but I have to mention another really weird out of character Spider-Man moment. In Amazing Spider-Man number 87, Spidey has been suffering from an illness that he determines to be the radioactivity in his blood slowly killing him. He's been feeling delirious for a while and having a hard time using his powers properly, and he's swinging around the city, monologuing, wondering what it means for his future. Suddenly, he remembers it's Gwen Stacy's birthday, classic Peter, and he doesn't have a gift. So in a bizarre moment, we see Spider-Man randomly decide to break into a jewelry store and he steals a necklace for her. He realizes what he's doing before it's too late and he kind of like puts it back, but he's already caused property damage and like, you know, thank God they don't have cameras because Jameson would just have a field day with that. The whole thing is just a really weird moment. Spider-Man starting to wonder if he's losing his mind. And the whole thing was really surprising to me, and he almost went through with it.
Number 5, killed MJ again. Yeah, for someone who claims to love her so much, Peter is not very good at treating MJ well. This one comes to us from another alternate reality though, so we do have to, you know, asterisk and add that in there, little editor note. Because of course, Peter would never kill Mary Jane in the main continuity, or more, he just hasn't done so yet. In the reality of Spider-Man Reign, we're taken to a potential future reality where Peter killed Mary Jane simply by loving her. They're being intimate, at least that's what's implied, caused Mary Jane to be exposed to Peter's radioactivity at a level where she ended up getting cancer and dying. His radioactive fluids. Yeah, that's pretty intense. In typical Peter fashion, this becomes one of his greatest regrets, giving MJ cancer, and only serves to basically drive him insane and turn him senile, which really doesn't help anyone and makes for a pretty crazy story when he returns as a bizarre and depressed version of Old Man Spider-Man. Old Man Spider-Man is super depressing.
Number 4. Worked for the Jackal. The whole clone saga was definitely one of Spidey's lowest points, especially just the way that they totally messed with Peter's character throughout the whole thing. He was calling himself the Spider and just acting generally unpleasant, but when he found out that he wasn't the real Peter Parker but a clone, he really didn't receive that news very well. The Jackal somehow ends up convincing Pete to work with him, and somehow Peter buys it, even though it means working against his friend Ben Reilly. Peter eventually does come to his senses, but man, how could he have ever been convinced to work with the supervillain in the first place? You know, every time I look back on this era, I remember why people hate it so much. Both versions of Spider-Man are pretty decent, but the way that they're pitted against one another as if there can only be one and everything, the whole thing just felt kind of forced.
Number 3 was too apathetic. Spider-Man's apathy is something that haunts him to this day and makes him pretty much the one to blame for his Uncle Ben's death. Well, I mean, I personally think Peter is much too hard on himself here, and that being that harsh only leads to more disasters later down the road that his intense sense of responsibility has a hand in causing, but I digress. Peter for sure thinks this is the worst thing he has ever done, allowing the man who would go on to kill his uncle to get past him. At the time when the guard who pursued the criminal asked for help, Peter simply didn't see the point in aiding. That wasn't his job, he thought. He wasn't a hero. However, afterward he learned that with great power comes great responsibility, a lesson that has haunted him and continues to both haunt and inspire him to this day.
Number 2. He killed Charlemagne. In the one-shot Spider-Man vs. Wolverine from 1987, we get to witness an epic showdown between these two fan favorites. Peter winds up in Germany investigating a mysterious arms dealer. Charlemagne turns out to be an old associate of Wolverine's, and she's got all kinds of people after her. They track her to East Berlin, where Wolverine plans to kill her, sparing her from being tortured by the KGB. Spider-Man isn't really cool with the whole killing her part of the plan, so the two of them have a bit of a fight about it. However, after a helicopter breaks up the fight for a second, Peter's Spidey sense kicks in, and thinking that Wolverine is behind him, he turns around and delivers a full-powered punch, instantly killing Charlemagne. It's implied that she probably intended for this to happen, as she was wanting to die and stuff, but still, if you had told me that Spider-Man once punched a woman with no superpowers and killed her in one hit, I'd be a little skeptical. But it really happened.
Number 1, probably killed Gwen Stacy. Once again, Peter is causing harm to those he loves. What's more, this whole moment where he attempted to save Gwen and we hear her neck snap is made even worse for Peter in terms of his own guilt over the situation by the fact that he never really knows if it was him or if it was Green Goblin who is to blame for her death. Was she dead before he grabbed her, or did she die when his webbing latched on to save her, breaking her neck? We still don't really know for sure, although I think Green Goblin claims that she died while she was falling. He's like, a fall like that, she'd die before she hits the ground. And I'm like, wait, is that how falling works? It's not. Anyways. I mean, either way, Peter Parker is kind of to blame here, as Green Goblin has a tendency to target those that Spider-Man loves. So once again, just loving Gwen was in a way a terrible thing for him to do to her.
Number 10, One Less Eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, The Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. Oh, so useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8. Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299, next up on the list we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. Number 7. Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Since Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these 2 twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well, and after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we got it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me." And cut to bam. Kicking off the list at number 10, Buried by Kraven. In the storyline Kraven's Last Hunt, published in 1987, it has quite an interesting illustration on its front page. We see a dark Spider-Man crawling out of a grave with the tombstone reading, "Here lies Spider-Man." Weird, what's going on? This 5-part series, of course, as you would guess, centers around the death of Spider-Man. So Kraven is frustrated after his failed attempts to catch Spider-Man, so he comes up with this plan and seemingly shoots him dead. So Kraven buries him, and even worse, he takes Spider-Man's suit and takes his place. So now, Kraven's roaming New York and brutally attacking criminals, including a group that was assaulting Mary Jane. So then 2 weeks later, Peter wakes up from the effects of the tranquilizer and digs himself out to freedom. Then when Spider-Man confronted Kraven, Kraven was like, "No way buddy, I'm the real deal. I'm doing this hero gig now, not you. Get out of town. Beat it, mister." And Kraven releases Vermin, which is just a great character. So he attacks Peter thinking he was the same Spider-Man that had given him a beatdown before. So then Peter has to now convince Vermin otherwise. Vermin is actually about to kill Peter until Kraven intervenes. Talk about a bad couple of weeks. Yeesh. And before we continue this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you toss this video a thumbs up because it really helps us out here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to Spider-Man's horrible life. Number 9. clones. The clone saga wasn't loved by fans. I mean, for starters, it actually lasted way too long. The clone saga began in 1994 and lasted until 1996, and it carried out through every single Spider-Man comic. So that entire time you were reading the issues, you were also forced to keep up with this dreadful clone plot that just wouldn't stop. And on top of that, there were these new characters and plots that were coming in every issue that it became almost a chore to retain interest. The story was set to end in Amazing Spider-Man 400 in 1995, but those early issues of the Clone Saga did so well with sales, so they decided to drag it on. One of the worst parts about all this was that fans had to find out that Ben Reilly was intended on being the real Spider-Man after all of this, and the Peter Parker we've been following for years was actually the clone. So naturally fans weren't having it, and they ended up retconning this again so that Peter was Spider-Man and Ben was still the clone. I mean, what a headache to explain, let alone be forced to read for years. And the worst part of the bunch being maximum clonage. This issue, that's when it goes the worst. So check it out, or don't. Number 8, best friend problems. It's always incredible to me when a superhero has a bully. Like, it always happens. And I mean, sure, it's a nice message to audience members not to be a bully. You know, you never know what battle somebody else is fighting at home. And it's usually a nice reveal. Like, Flash Thompson is more of a lighthearted bully in the new Spider-Man movies. He kind of looks up to Spider-Man, but he doesn't look to Peter Parker. It's a fun dynamic to play with. So when we meet Harry Osborn and see his arc, it's pretty wild. Harry initially wasn't a fan of Peter Parker in the first place. He thought he was a snob. But then he realized Peter's distance was actually due to his aunt's health problems, and the two of them ended up becoming good friends. In the 2002 Spider-Man film, we see the beginning of a best friend becoming the villain, and this time propelled by jealousy. And it was a nice relationship to see on screen. It added a lot to the film. We have James Franco playing Harry Osborn in the original trilogy, and by the time the third one rolls around, Harry is a full-on villain, sporting the new alter ego, the Green Goblin, taking the place, of course, of his father, Norman. Harry and his father's relationship was never easy breezy, even before Norman became a supervillain. So Peter was helping Harry get through problems with his father, and Spider-Man was fighting the Green Goblin. So we were treated to these layers of who knows what, and all these dynamic relationships playing in with each other. And it's what made the first Spider-Man movie so good. In the comics, when Peter and Norman finally figured out who each other really was, Norman suffered from amnesia after the fight. So Peter made up the story about how Norman was actually injured while he was helping Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin. Not a bad save. So Peter went to the hospital to check up on him, you know, see how things were going. And then Harry saw this as a sign that the two of them were friends. So sometimes your bestie gets close to you, sometimes they try and kill you with their dad's glider. You get what you got. And coming up at number 7, hit by a train. In Spider-Man Far From Home, we see Peter go toe-to-toe with Mysterio, a villain fans have been begging to see on the big screen for years. And Mysterio does a pretty good job convincing Peter that what he's seeing is real. But what Peter doesn't expect is a real-life train to hit him going really fast. There have actually been conversations online about how this hit should have killed Peter. He got hit by an Ice 3 bullet train, and one Reddit account went so far as to actually do the math on how Peter should have died with the speed and the momentum of the train. Also, that's a lot of effort. Just lie to us. Say he would have been fine. Don't tell us he would have died. Not only does this hit injure Peter, but once he slowly climbs onto the train and collapses, he's taken like almost 2,000 kilometers away to the Netherlands, where Happy has to pick him up in a field of tulips. This was a great part in the movie. I mean, seeing him lose everything and barely obtain the strength to go back and fight Mysterio again, you love to see it, we also hate to see it, you know? And number 6, extra arms. The Spider or the Man. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963, the issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them. If you don't want them, just toss them this way. Thanks. So he comes up with a solution and takes a swig. For Gwen, he adds, before downing this mix. And as we could have guessed, it doesn't go well, because it's on this list. So by the last page of the issue, we see Peter as he ends up growing 4 extra arms. Not like this, he says. No, it's happening, buddy. So the next issue focuses on Peter as he tries to get a solution for this new not so handy problem through Michael Morbius's blood. So with the new Morbius movie with Jared Leto coming out, could we possibly see Tom Holland sport the new 6-arm look? Part of me hopes not, but I mean, anything Tom Holland does is gold, so I'm here for it. And number 5. more girl problems. Peter and his human life alone could be a sitcom. In one trilogy, we have Mary Jane as the love life, and then in Garfield's movies, we have Gwen Stacy. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are very different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. So Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's at minimum attracted to her, right, physically. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's less interested. Oh, you gotta play it cool, Pete. Play it cool. Keep the mask on. Less talking, more masking. And number 4, the deal with the devil. The One More Day storyline is next up on our list. This is a 4-issue story, but because of delays, it took 5 months to conclude. That's a lot of waiting. I mean, we're still waiting for the Black Widow movie to come out, so I mean, it's not too bad in comparison, but still, any wait sucks. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, and instead of the usual thugs or enhanced scientist villain, we see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil. The devil, of course, being Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course were after him, now knowing his true identity. So after a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he's the one to blame. Even the opening of the story shows Aunt May in a hospital bed with Peter talking about how she was perfectly fine just a few days before. Like, it's dark right off the bat. So he first goes to Iron Man and gives him being the one who convinced Peter to reveal his identity in the first place. So he webs him up and gets all cool and bad cop. And it's nice to see, but it's also heartbreaking because that bullet was meant for him. Peter is feeling the guilt, and cue Mephisto. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying. So MJ adds to the pitch. So basically what happens is that the world will now forget about Peter's identity. Great. Aunt May will live. Neat. But the kicker is that MJ and Peter never got married. It's kind of like Shrek 4, except worse. So they hug one final time, and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be, and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it, me being Peter Parker, not married, and all that jazz. And all the backstory just like that was wiped out at the turn of a page. Number 3, the death of Spider-Man. When a supervillain escapes, it's not a good time. Usually they're coming back for that person that put them there in the first place. Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful and super saddening. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin and a few other bad apples that are out for revenge. And this entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, so everybody's watching. Everyone's running around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to safety, and he's limping around, tossing out quips, pulling off fire hydrants, and using Electro's current to like hurt everybody else. It's amazing. This is a plot that I think we'll actually see in the next Spider-Man movie in a way. So with all these villains now knowing Peter's true identity, we could get them all showing up to his house, just bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way, with Peter's heroic demise, that is. Number 2, Curtis Connors. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers a hand in a project or something, but I mean, giving them a hand literally could end up pretty bad. In the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion in a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. Hence the lizard growing the tail back thing. You got it. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. We see his arm grow back, but then as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors also becomes a full-on lizard. I mean, sure, lizards can grow their tails, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage and mix the DNA, the brain can alter as well. And his story arc begins with Amazing Spider-Man 6, and it's really cool. Especially if you've seen the movie, if you haven't quite read the comics, this is a nice little backstory that they didn't explain too much. And finally, number 1, he gave MJ cancer. You heard me. In Spider-Man Dark Reign, we learn a lot what Spider-Man's powers can do. The ability to climb walls, amazing. Shoot webs, ha, how fun. But when it comes to reproducing, his DNA might just be too problematic. The story takes place 30 years in the future in an alternate universe, Earth 70237. Peter ends up visiting the grave of MJ and discovers the real reason that she died. The radioactive cells in his sperm ended up giving MJ cancer. Yeah. That's what? Peter had the choice of staying with her when she was dying or attend gunshots outside as Spider-Man. He left her, and when he came back, she had already passed away. Super sad. This made Peter vow to never become Spider-Man again. It's a pretty dark story, and the whole giving MJ cancer thing, I mean, I hope we never have to relive that on the big screen ever. Not even anytime soon, just never in general. That would be great.
Number 10. Stopped a train with his body. In the second Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire, Spidey goes through some burnout after losing MJ to John Jameson and having his friendship with Harry Osborn fall apart. During this time, he's lost his spider powers and he gets attacked by Doc Ock. After an intense battle, the Mad Doc leaves Spidey to rescue a rogue train heading off of the rails. Pete, having already taken off his mask, puts himself directly in the line of danger and is stretched to the point of nearly breaking in two as he gives everything he's got to stop the train. The effort leaves him battered, bruised, and barely conscious, and in a touching moment, the citizens of New York move him to safety and return his mask, swearing that they won't tell a soul. It's a touching tribute to Spider-Man's sacrifice, and it definitely looks pretty painful. Hey Nerd Squad, if you like these videos and you want to see more, take a second to hit that like button and ring that notification bell. We really appreciate it. Number 9. Got dragged off to fight in another dimension. This version of Peter Parker has it pretty rough. When he was a boy, his parents died in a car crash, and his Uncle Ben was highly abusive. In his anger, he adopts the name Charlie Parker instead of Peter. He's a problem child, and he spends 2 years in a juvenile detention center. By age 13, he's living on his own and using his abilities to steal from drug dealers. If that's not bad enough, he's later recruited into the Superior Spider Army, picked up by Ashley Barton, and dragged off to fight in an alternate universe where the Earth is irradiated, without so much as an introduction or an explanation. They're just like, let's go, no time to explain. This version of Spidey is pretty grumpy, and it's easy to see why. Regular Pete already has a hard time, but this guy got dealt a seriously crappy hand. Still, having spider powers does seem pretty awesome. Number 8. Got beaten to near death by the Phoenix Four. The Avengers vs. X-Men event was epic and mind-blowing, featuring some crazy showdowns between our favorite heroes. In A vs. X Volume 1 Part 7, Spider-Man plays a big role as he trains with Hope Summers, trying to help her learn how to control the Phoenix Force. As she grows frustrated that the fight is escalating and she hasn't been able to help, Spidey tries to reassure her that her time will come. Ironically, it's Spider-Man's time that comes later, as he covers the escape of his fellow Avengers by distracting those who are controlled by the Phoenix Force. Despite him having no chance, Spidey gets up again and again after he's beaten to a pulp, likely suffering multiple broken bones while rescuing his friends. It's a real display of heroic sacrifice from everyone's favorite wall crawler. Number 7. Became a heartless killer and died. Introduced in What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine in 2008, Assassin Spider-Man is a serious dude. This version of Spidey becomes an assassin that works alongside Wolverine, which sounds super awesome and not like one of the worst things to ever happen to him. However, he eventually becomes kind of jaded, with no qualms about killing and just doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Worse still, this version of Pete doesn't even make any quips or crack jokes like the Spidey we know and love. He literally has a gun in his web shooters. He is eventually recruited into the Spider Army, but later he tragically dies. Still, not the worst thing to happen to Spider-Man. Number 6. Turned into a lizard beast and then died. In this universe, it was Gwen Stacy who was bitten and received spider powers, and the experience had a profound impact on Peter Parker. Pete idolized Spider-Woman and was desperate to be like her. So desperate in fact that he experimented on himself in a scene that goes horribly wrong, and he's transformed into a terrible lizard-like creature. He shows up in this form at the Midtown Senior Prom, where he does battle against Gwen. After a serious beatdown, Peter returns to his human form, but he still dies from his injuries. Being dead has probably got to be one of the worst things that's happened to Peter, but it's not as bad as all the suffering that some other versions of Spider-Man go through. Number 5. Became a werewolf. This version of Spidey appears in Marvel Zombies Army of Darkness Volume 1. He doesn't really have a large role or anything, but being transformed into a werewolf has got to be a new low for Spidey. In the comic, we see him with big old wolf ears and big hairy arms ripping out of his costume, and it is not lit. Can you imagine werewolf Spider-Man swinging through the moonlit sky chasing you down to eat you? Yikes. The werewolf web-slinger and his fellow superhero werewolves ravage the world and eat Galactus, later chasing after Ashley Williams when he appears in this universe. Number 4. Killed by Thanos. Is there anything worse than ceasing to exist? When Thanos performed his legendary snap with the Infinity Gauntlet, literally half the universe was wiped away, but I was too busy worrying about Spidey to even comprehend the destruction. Seeing Spider-Man disappear like dust on the big screen was seriously heart-wrenching for a lot of people. but it also spawned a generation of hilarious memes, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Luckily for us, these events are undone eventually, but man, there's nothing like seeing Spider-Man die to sober you up. Number 3, became one of the 4 horsemen of apocalypse. This has actually happened to Spider-Man on 2 different occasions. Once in Cable and Deadpool number 15 in 2005, and then again in Avengers Volume 4. In these 2 stories, Apocalypse unleashes his master plan for world domination, which includes recruiting 4 people he finds fit to be his Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The 2010 version is especially horrifying, with Spidey being horribly mutated into this hairy white beast, seemingly fused to a horse-like creature that looks like it's made of webbing. Being used by evil bad guys is bad enough, but being turned into a hideous monster for that is definitely not Spider-Man's finest hour. Number 2, been the last person alive on Earth. This version of Spider-Man is actually Ben Parker, in an alternate reality where he received spider powers when he accompanied his nephew Peter to a science demonstration and was bitten by a radioactive spider. Ben decided to use his powers to help others, but retired after his nemesis, the Emerald Elf, discovered his identity and killed his wife and Peter. Later on in life, Ben is approached by Ezekiel Sims, who warns him of the imminent arrival of Morlun, devourer of totems, on a mission to destroy all Spider-Folk. Ezekiel allows Ben to hide in his bunker under Sims' tower, and while he's there, the whole city of New York and presumably the world is subjected to nuclear destruction. He only emerges from the bunker later when the other Spider totems arrive in the universe to enlist his help. He is reminded by the OG Spider-Man of his own advice about great responsibility, and he suits up one last time to help the Spider Army. It must have been really lonely just sitting around in that bunker though. Damn. And here we are at number 1. Turned into a zombie and ate Mary Jane and Aunt May. This one is just seriously messed up. So in this story, a zombie virus is infecting heroes like Luke Cage and Hawkeye, and eventually Spider-Man as well. After being bitten by Colonel America, Spidey takes a punch that dislocates his jaw, and then in this fight realizes the level of destruction happening all across the city. He realizes in the moment he's gonna have to go save Mary Jane and Aunt May, so he just bails, swings off to go and save them ASAP. Unfortunately, he does show up a little too late, and the zombie virus is already working its way through his body. When MJ approaches, he lashes out and bites her, and as she turns into a zombie, Pete sets to work on Aunt May. Ultimately, we are treated to this horrifying scene in which Spidey holds up Aunt May's severed head and screams at it. Yeesh.
Number 10, drugged and tortured. Classic. Those are 2 things you never want to happen to you, in that order either. Age of Ultron was an event that went down in 2013, and I gotta tell you, nothing is worse than waking up and realizing you slept past your alarm. You feel panicked, you feel all hot in your chest, you feel stupid, and you still feel tired. Worst of all, you don't even get any more rest. It's just stress and anxiety all in one ball. But how about sleeping through the end of the world? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly where Peter Parker's story begins in all of this Ultron madness. He wakes up and the world is in ruins. Desperate to help and find answers, he hits the streets, only to be drugged and kidnapped by Ultron's goons. He then waited, badly beaten, to be sold to Ultron. So it's bad, it's getting worse and worse. So after a daring rescue from Hawkeye, the team actually is frustrated with Hawkeye and Peter. Tony walks over to use some tech just to make sure he's alright, but in doing so could potentially compromise their secret location. Damn you, Tony even says to him. Sad. Imagine if Tony said damn you to you, you'd be like, oh, please. And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Okay, back to some sad Spider-Man times. Number 9, Aunt May. This time a little bit different, but still the same. So with Miles Morales breaking the internet more and more every day with Spider-Man 3 rumors, and of course the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, it's fair to look back on the saddest part of that first PS4 game. Peter is faced with the ultimate hero scenario. If he uses the antidote to save Aunt May, there won't be enough to save everybody else from the Devil's Breath bioagent. And it's really well done. I mean, many gamers, including myself, definitely shed a tear at this point. My throat got tight. I was like, hey, skip, I don't want to see it.
What if we use it to cure someone right now?
Then there won't be enough to cure the others.
So when the game was being made, interestingly enough, the big ups didn't want them to kill Aunt May at first. But then once they saw the flow of the story and how things were playing out, they simply said, you can kill Aunt May, you've earned it.
You earned the part.
Number 8, Bike Messenger.
Why, Peter, you're bleeding.
Oh, yeah. I stepped off a curb and got clipped by one of those bike messengers.
Yeah, for sure, a bike messenger did that to your arm, not razor blades made by the Green Goblin. Yeah, so this dinner scene is anxiety central. Similar energy to when Michael Keaton's Vulture is grilling Peter on the way to the dance. Yeah, that injury is one of many in the Spider-Man trilogy, but it's the location of the injury that gets Peter in the most amounts of trouble. Right on his arm, front and center. It was this moment where Norman Osborn realizes that he's Spider-Man. If only you sat on his left, would have been smooth sailing. Come on, man, you have senses. Your right is my left, you gotta flip it. Here you go. Number 7, impaled from a glider. So in the movie, it's a well-timed backflip that ends up taking out Norman Osborn. And the best part is, Norman does that to himself. He's like, and then he goes, whoo, and gets it. It's awesome. His own glider kills him. What a life lesson right there. Don't be a dick. So stupid. Like no one's there, I'm like, sorry. Well, in the comics, it went down a little bit differently. See, Ben Reilly was a clone, of course, created by the Jackal and went by the name of the Scarlet Spider. And it was him who in fact got smoked by this glider, causing his death immediately afterwards, revealing that Ben Reilly is indeed the clone. Number 6. He loses a leg. I have a great arm and leg joke at the end of this one. Here we go. It took me an hour. I'm like, that's it. Peter Parker, this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. So this happened about 2 years after the birth of his daughter, May, and the incident was so horrific for Peter that he quit. Yeah, he stopped being Spider-Man, which is sad. But then cut to many years later, May Parker grows up and puts on the suit herself. And she looks pretty badass. We love the MC2 universe. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and a cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Too bad she didn't run into any legs dealers. Number 5, rocked. Okay, we've seen Thanos throw a moon at the Avengers. We've seen him snap away half of the Avengers and half of all living creatures, in fact. But hand to hand, the Mad Titan is still brutal. If you look back now on the Infinity Gauntlet event, this was a wild ride. I mean, Wolverine's bones turn into rubber, Cyclops gets smothered by a clear block, Iron Man gets his head cut off. It's violent, it's spicy. And then Spider-Man, we see him get a face full of rock. Yeah, Traxia straight up beats him to death and then finishes him with a rock. That's some like caveman stuff right there. I mean, at least Thanos made the deaths of the other Avengers somewhat quick. I mean, come on guys. I feel like if I had to pick one way to go with Thanos, I would much rather be turned into dust than having a rock here. This is already messed up enough, we don't want that. Number 4, he exploded. Yeah, so we touched on Marvel Zombies in part 2 or 3 or 1. We lose track here, okay? Spider-Man's had a rough go. But in Marvel Zombies Return, we see Spider-Man after he gets transported to another world. Classic. But this time, the field trip goes dark when Spider-Man realizes he's in the past. So there's a lot of zombie stuff on the up and up. So the zombie Spider-Man in this world ends up having some of Sandman's crew for lunch. So Sandman gets out of Dodge, right? But upon doing this, he bumps into the Spider-Man and he's like, oh, you again, you're not eating me, buddy. And then Sandman puts himself into Spider-Man's mouth, which is kind of like eating him, idiot. Which already, worst case scenario, would have that much sand in your mouth. And then to make things even worse, Sandman then grows and moves around until he explodes out of Spider-Man. Like a gender reveal balloon. It's like, pah, it's sand. Just kidding, it's sand.
You made a delicious sandwich. So did you. Very crunchy.
Number 3, he was crucified. That's right, in X-Men issue 191, we see our boy Pete on the front panel with the words Raiders of the Lost Temple written at the top. See, this issue is a lot of fun for everybody, but of course, Spider-Man. The issue begins with the Avengers and the X-Men trapped in this world where Kulan Gath has made everything a little bit old-fashioned, like very old-fashioned. His spell turned cars into horse-drawn carriages. It turned guns into swords, which way more fun in my opinion, and police officers turn into civic guards. The whole city becomes medieval times, it's insane. Then Spider-Man gets crucified and tortured, even admitting that he didn't think it would be possible to hurt so much. and gaffes barely begun. Yeah, he was upset. Honestly, he was one issue away from Ramsay Bolton walking in and calling him Reek instead of Pete. Going for the Game of Thrones fans, there you go. Number 2, he dies. Again. Sometimes dying is just the way to go, especially if it's loud and heroic. Maybe you're like on your knees, you're yelling, you're ripping your shirt off or something cool, some kind of Dwayne The Rock Johnson way. You gotta do what you gotta do, even if that means dying alone with nobody to witness you being a badass. And that's exactly what happens in the story at the hands of Thanos. So once again, Thanos doesn't actually end the Spider's life in this issue. It's his own heroic actions that puts the nail in the coffin. He's going over the mental checklist of things to do. You know, classic Spidey things. Pick up Mary Jane, fill up on web fluid, deliver some mean-ass barbecue sauce to Aunt May's, the usual. And when a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that it's another walk in the park for him. That is until the cooling machine explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air. Now, seconds before his heart stops, he reflects on the fact that he always made jokes in dire times, then simply coming to realization that there are no more jokes. And crash, the barbecue sauce breaks off the ground as Spider-Man dies. Really sad, a weird barbecue sauce twist, but it actually made it seem more sad, I don't know. But it gets worse. Just wait, there's more bad. Death isn't the end, especially in Thanos' case. He meets Peter Parker and then makes him watch as the mother he tries to save yells in agony over the loss of her child. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the two, but he didn't even save the kid. Bad luck Brian over here, come on. Number 1, Let It Ring. Remember that song? It was great. Well, it's so good, man. Apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. Alrighty, we'll finish off this list with one of my personal favorite moments of the Spider's horrible run with luck, maybe because I'm claustrophobic and this one triggered me. You've been warned. Spider-Man 300. There's a huge brawl with Venom and Spider-Man, and it's a lot of fun, right? A lot of webbing, a lot of punching and kicking and thwips. And at the beginning, Spider-Man is trying desperately to reach the Fantastic Four's Sonic Blaster, right? Just one little pew, and we're good. Eddie Brock is doing his villain monologue stuff, and Spidey's like, yeah, keep talking, and he's trying to reach his blaster, and then Brock notices and slams him through the floor. Then Venom knocks him out and then Spider-Man wakes up upside down. Yeah, he's webbed up to this giant bell. So when the clock strikes midnight, that heavy clapper, it's gonna kill him. It's gonna get him right in the head. It's kind of like Saw in a way. It's really twisted. So in a last minute attempt, Peter barely manages to squeeze his hand out, stopping the bell from ringing. But of course, it's not easy. It's only time before the constant hitting will crush the bones in his hand. And he acknowledges this too. He knows that he's in a sticky situation. After barely escaping, the bell does finally ring. And if Peter sticks around, he too would die along with Venom. So even if you win, you lose. That's life. That's how life goes. Sometimes you're stuck between a bell and a hard place, literally. Kicking off the list at number 10, Souvenir Symbiote. So during the events of 1984's Secret Wars, Spidey came across a symbiote while on Battleworld. In issue 7, Spider-Woman makes her grand entrance, and Peter Parker reacts in his usual manner. I mean, one of his first thoughts is to sue her for infringing on his shtick, but he clocks that she just tossed a boulder as easily as he could, so maybe there's more behind her than meets the eye. In the next issue, he gets an up-close personal look at this new black suit Spider-Woman was rocking. And now we have a new costume for Spidey. And he loves it. He feels stronger, he feels quicker, and he's even impressed by the mechanics of the suit's ability to change. So while it all seemed like the perfect aid in this massive battle, Peter questioned why his new suit was so different after all. Oh well, he says, and then he returns to Earth with his new suit that just happens to activate his Spidey sense. And we all know that there was much more to this suit than we thought. You gotta leave things where you find them, Pete. You never know, they might just be, I don't know, an alien race. And before we go on to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a like on this video because it helps the channel out a lot over here. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to some more Spider-Man mistakes. Number 9, I am Spider-Man? Yeah, super identities are meant to be super secret, okay? So when Tony Stark announced that he was Iron Man on the big screen, I mean, sure, it was a cool moment, but since then, there have been numerous people trying to take him down. During the events of Civil War issue 2, Spider-Man decides to take a page out of Tony's book and announces to the world who the web-slinger really was. So later on, we see a bullet that was aiming for MJ, but ended up hitting Aunt May instead, resulting in one of the best Spider-Man arcs ever, the Back in Black storyline. So while it's cool to see Peter rage out and get payback wearing nothing but a polo and cool pants, all that pain could have been avoided if you just kept your mask on and your mouth shut. Number 8, the deal with the devil. Next up on our list, we have One More Day. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. We see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil, Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, that bullet hit Aunt May, which I just talked about, but that's not the end of it. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying from said bullet. So MJ adds to this massive pitch. So basically what ends up happening is that the world will forget about Peter's identity, Aunt May will live, but in order for that to happen, MJ and Peter never got married. Kind of like in Shrek 4, for all the 9 people that watch Shrek 4. So they hug one final time and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it. And that fast, all that backstory was just wiped out at the turn of one page. And readers at this point were also forced to suffer and join alongside this horrible end to this horrible deal. Number 7, homesick. So now is a time more than ever when we have to be careful about spreading any virus, right? So you would think when Peter gets bitten during, say, I don't know, a zombie apocalypse, he would stay as far away from his loved ones as possible. In Marvel's Zombies Army of Darkness, we see our heroes run into Ash Williams, traveler between worlds. And he's arrived with the Necronomicon warning him that the army of the dead will rise in this world. So Peter sees this firsthand beside Ash and he decides he's not going to let any more innocents die on his watch. And then in the next issue, after being bit himself, Peter pretends to munch on Hawkeye's brains before making a daring escape. Not a bad idea. So he gets Ash to safety, explaining why he's still a human being. And then Spidey decided to go home and make sure that May and MJ were okay with this bite and first-hand experience as to what happens. And Peter's newfound appetite starts to kick in. You should have stayed away, Peter. This went from bad to worse real quick. Number 6, not worth the fight. So we have Peter Parker, but this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe, which is my personal favorite. Wonder why. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. And at the start of this issue, he reflects on how much he loved his newborn daughter, saying he wanted to spend every waking moment with her and MJ. But he had other responsibilities. At least he thought he did. His words, not mine. So when May was 2 years old, he got into a fight with the Green Goblin and ended up losing a leg because of it, ending his days as the web-slinger. Now it's great in one way because we get to see May Parker rise to the occasion and put on the suit herself, and she's totally badass while she does it. But to think how differently their lives would have been had Peter have just retired and, I don't know, focused on his family, it would have been a lot different. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Let's just hope she comes across a, I don't know, leg dealer. Number 5, too much fun. I mean, sure, saving people can be a blast, swinging through the air, doing flips, talking the entire time to bad guys, but when you find yourself totally comfortable in any job, that's when mistakes happen, when you're not paying full attention. And we see this unfold in a brutal way in Spider-Man issue 17, titled At the Hands of Thanos. So he's going over the mental checklist of things to do in his Spider-Man day, like pick up Mary Jane, and no, not that kind. Fill up on web fluid, you know, usual Spidey stuff. When suddenly a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that this is just another walk in the park for him. He saves them, but the cooling machine falls and then explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air, killing Peter Parker. Now, believe me, that sounds terrible and all, but it gets worse. Yeah. Death isn't the end, and especially in the world where Thanos is around. He meets Peter in the afterlife and makes him watch as a mother yells in agony over the loss of her child during that same explosion. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the woman and her daughter, but he didn't even save the kid. I mean, maybe if you weren't so focused on the barbecue sauce, things would have turned out differently. I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know. Number 4, a helping hand. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers help during a project. I mean, giving them a hand though, literally, could end up pretty bad. So in the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion during a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. And as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors becomes a lizard man. And no, not like a lizard man. He becomes a lizard man. Like he's a giant lizard. Sorry, what happened? I mean, sure, lizards can grow back their tails easily, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage, the brain can alter as well. still. So his story arc begins with The Amazing Spider-Man 6, if you want to see that nightmare take place. Number 3, silence is golden. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question, because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's attracted to her, and she digs the webhead as well. I mean, look at him, who doesn't? All that confidence, all that lankiness, you gotta. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's actually less interested. Come on, Pete, you gotta play it cool. Be that mysterious guy. Number 2, the Spider or the Man. We now go to Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963. The issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them off your hands gladly if you wanna just, toss those to the side, sure. So he thinks it's a great idea to drink the solution that he's had that would get rid of his superpowers. Just in case he wanted to, I don't know, get rid of superpowers for some reason. For Gwen, he says, before downing the mix. And as you could have guessed, it doesn't work at all. Well, kind of. I mean, he grows 4 extra arms, so, take that what you will. Not like this, he says. Oh yeah, homemade vaccine for the win. And finally, number 1, not my problem. In a list full of mistakes, I think it's only fair to end on the mistake that haunts Peter the most. After letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his Uncle Ben's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this tremendous loss, especially not having parents in the first place, but he was responsible for letting this thug get away, and he honestly just let it happen. And it all takes place in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. Oh yeah, we see this mess go down right here. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds in a sassy way with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1. That means me." Sounds like a great plan, Pete. So how did that end up again?
Number 10, Ultimate Clone Saga. This version of the Clone Saga didn't just have a good and evil clone of Peter Parker, but instead had a whole slew of clones to choose from. This time around, the people responsible for creating these Peter Parker clones were Otto Octavius and Dr. Connors, who were both working with the FBI and CIA. It also involves a version of Jessica Drew that instead is a female clone of Peter, but who still had all of his memories. Weird. The CIA planned to manipulate her mind and wipe Peter's memories from it, but before they got a chance to follow through with their plan, Jessica freed the other clones and they all escaped. You can find this story in the Ultimate Spider-Man series. Number 9, Web of Death. I'm sorry, but you know my love of the 90s, so sometimes we gotta go there. This 4-part story arc takes place between 2 comic serials, The Amazing Spider-Man and Spectacular Spider-Man. While it is part of the Clone Saga, which has led, I'm sure, many to dismiss Web of Death, and many of the consequences of the story were later undone, I do think it's something worth reading. Especially if you're a Doc Ock fan, because it has lots of good moments between him and Peter, who at the time is dying from a virus given to him by Vulture. And we also get to see the brutal death of Otto at the hands of the frightening, messed up Peter Parker clone, Kane, with his luscious hair. This is also the story arc where MJ got pregnant and her and Peter are gonna have a baby. There's also a part of the story where you think that Peter actually kicked the bucket and died. Needless to say, if you want some intrigue and murder and you can deal with 90s comics and you love them maybe like I do, this one is for you. So, you're welcome. Or, sorry. Number 8, Kraven's Last Hunt. This scary Spider-Man story originally made us think that Spider-Man had finally been defeated and even killed. Kraven sets out to capture and kill Spider-Man, his ultimate prey, because Spidey always managed to get away. And surprisingly, Kraven succeeded, and he made it all look pretty easy. Kraven buried Spider-Man and then took up the mantle himself, aiming to prove that he could do an even better job than his foe at defeating his own villains, because he figured Spider-Man had gotten away so many times, I really gotta do more to prove myself here. And to Kraven, defeating Spider-Man's foes proved that he was better. But when Spider-Man shockingly returns, spoiler alert, he was not dead, he was just knocked out for a few weeks, he revealed to Kraven his objective as Spider-Man was never to completely destroy his foes, but simply to prevent the crimes they sought to commit. Deciding that he had achieved everything he could while in his prime, and he'd proven himself pretty much, Kraven let Spider-Man go, and in the end he took his own life, resigned with his accomplishments. But don't worry, it's a comic book, so he comes back. Number 7, Dying Wish. In this story arc, starting in Amazing Spider-Man issue 698 and spanning 3 issues, Peter Parker does actually die. Sort of. This is the final chapter in an ongoing plot of Otto Octavius, wherein Otto aims to take over Peter's body as his was failing. He succeeds in swapping bodies with Peter and leaves Parker's consciousness to die inside his former body. Ugh. While Peter inside Otto's body is fighting to stay alive, in the end he does perish, but not before he can flood Otto's mind with memories of his life, inspiring Otto Octavius to flip sides and turn to a life of heroics, surprisingly. Even aiming, like Craven in a way, to be better than Peter, taking up the mantle superior Spider-Man. Because obviously, he's like, I'm gonna be superior to Peter Parker. Doesn't quite turn out that way, but that's okay. Number 6, Spider-Man Reign. So, you may be familiar with the Old Man Logan storyline, and have you ever wondered what this story would be like if it were about Spider-Man instead? Well, if you have, look no further, because this dark and depressing story is basically Old Man Parker, or Old Man Spider-Man. This version of Peter Parker is an old man full of regrets. Peter went on to own a flower shop, but was destroyed when MJ died of cancer as a result of being exposed to his radioactive bodily fluids. Basically driven insane by grief, he ends up returning to a life of fighting crime in his old age, when he's not busy clutching tombstones while crying and having very terrifying hallucinations. This story is also almost as violent as it is depressing, so if you're into that, you should check it out. Number 5, Go Down Swingin'. If you haven't heard about this story arc and you are a big fan of the Spider-Man comics and Peter Parker's villains, this one is going to be a must-read for you. This 4-part story arc takes place in the Amazing Spider-Man series starting in issue 797. Realizing that he is at his most powerful when he gives into his own inner demons, Norman Osborn plots to get his powers back, and part of this plot involves the Carnage symbiote. Yep, I think you know where we're going with this. Norman Osborn manages to succeed in this and merges with the symbiote to become Red Goblin. It takes tons of heroes from the Spider-Man world to band together and defeat him after he manages to convince Peter Parker to give up the Spider-Man mantle in exchange for not brutally killing Peter and his family. I mean, is that a fair deal? Instead, Parker is forced to fight against Red Goblin as himself in order to defeat this new version of the 2 merged psychotic foes. Probably one of the most horrifying foes we've yet to see. Also, it really messed up Norman Osborn doing this. Like, a lot. But I guess that was the goal. Number 4, Back in Black. This 5-part story arc takes place in Amazing Spider-Man starting in issue 539. Aunt May is rushed to critical care after being shot by an assassin while out with MJ and Peter. While her life hangs in the balance, Peter sets out to uncover evidence as to who is behind the attack. He discovers that Kingpin is to blame and pays a visit to Kingpin, who is in jail at the time, simply to kick the living out of him. The fight is brutal and violent. With Aunt May's fate uncertain, Peter tells Kingpin that he better hope that Aunt May survives, as his own life depends on it, promising that if Aunt May dies, he will return to finish Kingpin off and kill him. A pretty dark story for a hero who is generally known as having a no-kill policy. Number 3, Absolute Carnage. Absolute Carnage might not specifically center around Peter Parker's Spider-Man, but it is an event involving tons of characters from the Spider-Verse. In Absolute Carnage, Cletus Cassidy returns from the dead after merging with a new symbiote. The symbiote Carnage has seemingly perished as he attempted to save Cassidy when the two fell together from space back to Earth. Long story. However, remnants of the symbiote live on in Cassidy and are able to influence the new Grendel symbiote, basically turning it into sort of a new version of Carnage. With a new link to Null through the Grendel symbiote, Cassidy agrees to help free Null and sets out to collect the remnants of other symbiotes known as codexes, located in the spines of every person and super, dead or alive, who has ever bonded with a symbiote. So he's gotta go remove all their spines. Number 2, Shed. This 4-part story started in Spider-Man issue 630 and centers on Dr. Kurt Connors. Though Spider-Man is also involved in this too, obviously. It is his series after all. Connors, after being reformed from his life as the Lizard, finds himself once again pulled to the dark side after the death of his wife Martha and the near loss of his son Billy, both to cancer. Billy, what a son name. Dr. Connors begins to lose control and once again finds himself becoming the Lizard and losing himself to animalistic instincts. The Lizard decides the best way to shake Connors' consciousness is by eating his son Billy. Spider-Man races across town to save Connors and stop him from this, but arrives too late. That's right, Doc Connors eats his own son, and as a result, he fully becomes Lizard. Not only is the story here brilliant, but there is some great use of color involved as well when it comes to the art. Lots of dramatic colors play with the use of light and dark, creating stark shadows, mixed with some brilliant pops of a blood red. Number 1, I Walked with a Spider. Sounds like I'm going to tell you about like a little children's tale. Once upon a time, there was a... Patton Parnell is actually one of the most terrifying alternate Spider-Man that I have yet to uncover. If you want something really gruesome, then this is a story for you. It only spans one issue of Edge of the Spider-Verse. You can find it in issue number 4. This issue was written by Clay McLeod Chapman with its disturbing and vivid artwork coming from Elia Bonetti. The story centers around Patton, who lives with his abusive Uncle Ted. He is bit by a radioactive spider and undergoes a slow, gruesome transformation into a spider-like monster that also comes with an uncontrollable urge to feed on living flesh. You know what they say, with great power comes great appetite. That's what they say in this comic. It's true. Number 10, Vulture plus Mysterio equals plots? Okay, so Quentin Beck would have likely known about Stark Tech since he used to work for him, like his all-powerful device, Edith. And if he didn't, he'd probably know someone who knew about it and wanted to help him since Tony has so many enemies. But how did Beck know about Peter? Now you could argue that the information was given to him via Fury, but I would think he'd have to have known before that to determine that the threat would be close enough to have Parker brought in, which implies that he knew it before he even met Spider-Man and knew who he was. Now he could have acquired this info through a leak in Tony's armor, haha, see what I did there? Someone who worked for him but who maybe knew and wanted to share that they knew Spider-Man's secret identity for some reason. Once again, could have been Tony's enemy. I'm pretty sure Tony though would have kept a secret like that far more guarded than any of his others. There is a more frightening option, that Mysterio somehow got the info out of Vulture, who knows Spidey's identity but so far has appeared to keep it to himself. If Mysterio knew that Edith would likely be passed down to Spidey, he could have been working to build up connections with Spider-Man's enemies in an attempt to get information on him. Are they connected? I don't know. Number 9, Sinister Six. Okay, the scary part of this theory is that although we've all been hoping and praying that our wishes come true and we get a version of the Sinister Six in the MCU, at this point, it would actually likely catch us off guard if we did. Where films like Sony's Amazing Spider-Man 2 out of 2014 and Spider-Man 3 out of 2007 were ruined by an excessive number of villains, if we didn't see the Sinister Six coming and the film didn't push so hard to explain all the intricacies of the group, it would actually be exhilarating to see them just randomly show up. Especially with all the little Easter eggs we've had so far. Sinister Six could be a scary cliffhanger to end the MCU's Spider-Man 3 on, with them showing up at the end and just taking down the hero, making us wonder if he was actually going down for good or if he would eventually get back up. After all, we've had plenty of Spidey death scares in the comics, right? Time to bring those over, come on. I guess we got it in Infinity War, but whatever, shut up. Number 8, Happy becomes Doc Ock. So for us to have a Sinister Six, there is someone we would sorely need, Doc Ock. While Vulture, Mysterio, Electro, and Scorpion have been introduced as Spidey villains, we still have yet to see some of the most iconic Spider-Man villains, like Chameleon, Doc Ock, Sandman, or Green Goblin. While some have speculated that Happy is intended to replace Uncle Ben and end up with Aunt May, it seems more likely that Tony Stark was supposed to step into a surrogate version of his uncle's role. This is highlighted by the fact that Tony died and left a wealth of responsibility to Peter as Iron Man's superhero heir, in a sense. Happy has access to Tony's tech, has a good relationship with Peter that is just begging to be turned sour, and has a thing for Aunt May, all signs that could be pointing to him becoming Doc Ock. But wait a minute, Doc Ock didn't have a relationship with Aunt May, except for that time when he tried to marry her, dun dun dun. Okay, I know that was a ploy to like get a nuclear power plant, but still, I'm counting it. There was chemistry, I saw it in their eyes. Number 7, Kraven the Hunter. Many speculate that Kraven the Hunter will make an appearance in the 3rd installment of the Spider-Man films from the MCU. Tom Holland has already expressed that he would be on board and would be interested in seeing Kraven enter the MCU. We also have already had a character pop in with ties to him. Did you spot him? Dmitry Smirdyakov, while not confirmed as the Chameleon yet, could be the villain that we know him to be in the comics, and turn out to also be the half-brother of Kraven as well in the MCU. Because yeah, Chameleon's the half-brother of Kraven, in case you didn't know. Giving us a lead into his character and maybe opening up the potential of the two working together to capture or defeat Spider-Man. Many have also considered that rather than go with the famous Last Hunt storyline, which while brilliant in comic form may not translate as well to film, that Kraven could have a tie to Wakanda, and that the herbs from Wakanda are somehow tied into what grants him his power, similar to his comic book powers origins. Although he's not taking herbs from Wakanda, but I mean he could be in the MCU. Number 6. Venom tie-in. Many have conferred that Sony's Venom and MCU Spider-Man will never meet due to those who produce them. I mean, if they could have done, I'm sure Sony would have loved to have Peter in their Venom film alongside Brock, as let's be honest, having a Venom movie without Spider-Man is kinda weird, especially when it's an origins film. So you've got a suit mimicking Spidey's abilities, but there's no Spider-Man. However, some have suggested that we could still see a comic plot like Maximum Carnage make its way to the big screen, as the two films could actually be set in the same universe. What? The Marvel Cinematic Universe is said to be in Earth 199999, while Venom's universe has yet to have a confirmed alternate Earth number. The only thing you can actually find for the Venom film alternate is a temporal reality number as a placeholder, and even that's hard to find. However, we have gotten a couple Easter eggs that could be used to connect Venom to the MCU. At the beginning of the Venom film, we learned about an astronaut who crash landed, John Jameson, aka John Jonah Jameson III, JJ's son, and in the MCU, we see JJ at the end of the Spider-Man film. Once again played by Simmons, so good! The Jameson family existence could be the proof that these worlds are actually one in the same. Bring on the maximum carnage! Or don't. We'll see what happens. Number 5. Ned's fate. Many think that Ned and Peter have become too good of BFFs in the MCU for Ned to escape a deadly fate. Usually when Peter has people that he really cares about, a lot of them end up in danger and some of them end up dying in the comics. This could either mean in Spider-Man 3 that we might see Ned end up dead, or we may even see the far from home predictions for his character come true, and see him transform into Hobgoblin, becoming closer to his comic book counterpart. Number 4. Kingpin and Daredevil. It's hard to keep a crime boss behind bars for long in the comics due to their amount of connections. They got a lot of connections, which is what some might be thinking when it comes to the Kingpin getting locked away in the Spider-Man PS4 game. Kingpin goes on to promise as he's locked away that the city will be wishing they had him back within a month. And as the game ends with the city being somewhat submerged into chaos, he may just be right. Others have hoped that we may also get to see some other superheroes cameo in the sequel to the game. And if Kingpin does return, who better to make an appearance than Daredevil, the protector of the New York neighborhood known as Hell's Kitchen. Granted, I'm not quite sure if more heroes would even be able to join, since there's still the issue of character rights. Studio ownership is just ruining all of our mashup fun. Stop it. Stop it. Stop fighting over these guys. I want all of them. I want all of them in one game. Not a fighting game. An adventure RPG. Number 3. Never Left. We're gonna go Matrix on this one. So, what if Peter is still stuck in Mysterio's illusion and never escaped it? Dun dun dun! Well, this seems unlikely. It wouldn't be the first time that Marvel took us on a wild ride, especially while compared to the comics. And how would we know that everything around him is actually real? The level of virtual reality Beck was able to produce seemed to be insane. It's completely possible that he just has Parker kidnapped on some kind of soundstage and is making him think everything is fine while he fools the world into thinking that he himself, Mysterio, is actually a hero. And then, maybe Spider-Man's missing. Who knows? Number 2. Kindred. In the comics, a new character has recently revealed itself, Kindred. We don't know much about this character, save that they seem to know Peter Parker well enough, affectionately referring to him as Pete, were terrorized by Norman Osborn in their life, and are currently a demon who was once a human soul condemned to hell. Many have guessed who this character could be. Perhaps the baby that Norman Osborn stole from MJ and Peter, or Gwen and Norman's son? If you're shocked that Gwen and Norman have a son together, don't worry, so is the rest of the world. Ick. Some have even guessed that the villain might not be a man at all, but could actually be Gwen Stacy. I personally think a good shocking twist would be that Kindred is Uncle Ben, but it wouldn't really make that much sense though, so. Number 1. Gobnom / Venlin? In the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man game, fans are treated to an end credit scene that is sure to blow off their socks when it is revealed that the Venom symbiote is being used to keep Harry in stasis. We see Norman rest his hand on his son's tank, where he can be seen floating, and see the tendrils of the symbiote reaching back. What does this mean? Many are thinking that we may get to see some insane hybrid of Green Goblin serum and the symbiote together when Harry emerges, and that may be how he recovers, or that his transformation may simply be a result of Norman's desperate but mad attempt to somehow save his son. The closest we've ever seen to something like this would be with Red Goblin, Norman armed with the deadly combo of Carnage and Goblin, and that was already pretty terrifying, so I guess we'll see, but that would be awesome.
Number 10. Tony Stark created Spider-Man. This theory comes to us from the MCU, and it poses the idea that Tony Stark kept a secret from his young protege, Peter, which is that Stark Industries is actually the company responsible for creating the radioactive spider that transformed Peter. In the cinematic universe, we have assumed Peter Parker's origins, but it has yet to be fully explained. Probably because we've already heard it so many times, and everyone is already super familiar with it. But it also makes many wonder about the details involving this version of this story, and any secrets that could be lurking within the retelling of this origins. Number 9. Return to the Raimiverse. With Sony's film Morbius set to be released next year, many have theorized as to which cinematic universe the film will be set in, and what universes it could even perhaps connect. A few hints in the trailer led some fans to speculate it could be based in the MCU, which turned out to be an accurate theory after Morbius was confirmed as being considered within the MCU. While some had originally theorized that it being a Sony film should mean that it is simply set in the same universe as Venom. Despite it being confirmed as MCU, some fans have speculated it could be linked to an older Spider-Man cinematic universe as well, the Raimiverse. A Spider-Man universe that some fans loved and other fans hated. So where does this theory come from? Some have pointed to the murderer graffiti featuring Spidey's likeness, spotted in the film as a sign, believing that the artistic rendition of Spider-Man looks more similar to Tobey Maguire's version of the suit than any other. Also, that pose. This would be weird and potentially scary for those who were not so hot on the Spider-Man Raimiverse. But really though, this theory is pretty out there. Except I guess it's not super out there now that we know that Raimi is going to be directing the new Doctor Strange movie. Number 8. Since the beginning. Another theory has posed that Morbius has actually been around potentially in the MCU for longer than we anticipated. With Michael Keaton showing up at the end of the trailer, many have made the assumption that he will be reprising his role as Adrian Toomes, Spider-Man villain Vulture, despite the fact that no character name has yet been credited to him in the film. And it seems as though Michael Keaton's character knows Morbius by his full name, but how do they know each other? Some have theorized that they met at the end of Spider Homecoming, and that the Morbius film could retcon Morbius as being a potential villain or anti-hero in the MCU for longer than we knew about. Observant fans have even pointed out a character that shuffles past in the background of a shot of Matt Gargan during the post-credits scene, when Scorpion asks Vulture about Spider-Man's secret identity. That does seem to have a very similar look beard and hair-wise to Jared Leto's Morbius.
Relax. It's not on you.
Number 6. Doc Ock. Speaking of villains like the Vulture, with so many people hopeful for a potential Sinister Six film, some fans desperately theorized that Morbius' mentor in the trailer, played by Jared Harris, who as of yet is playing an unnamed character, could secretly end up being Dr. Octopus. Sadly, Jared Harris has shut down this theory hard when asked about it in interviews, although he has commented how much he enjoys hearing about all the fans' imaginative theories. Still, if he was actually playing Doc Ock, but it was meant to be a secret, wouldn't he still deny it? As expected, he has been tight-lipped when it comes to discussing his character's true identity in the film. Number 5. Ned Leeds. Some fans thought we might see Ned die in Far From Home, but of course this never happened. Phew! But another theory is afoot in regards to what could happen to Ned Leeds' character in the MCU in the next Spider-Man chapter. While he did end up briefly dating Betty Brant, who in the comics ends up becoming his wife, it has led many fans to ponder in what other ways Ned's MCU version could mirror his comic book version. Some have speculated that we could even see him become brainwashed and turned into the villain Hobgoblin in Spider-Man 3, as was Ned's fate in the comic book world. So perhaps there is still a risk that things could get bleak for Ned yet. Number 4. Kindred. We still have yet to figure out the true identity of this very secretive Spider-Man villain, who claims to be a demon from hell who was once a human living on Earth. We know that Kindred was betrayed by Spider-Man, knows his true identity, and is here to get revenge on both Peter Parker and Norman Osborn. But what we don't know is just who exactly Kindred is, although apparently Norman Osborn does. This has led many fans to theorize on a variety of known characters that the centipede-controlling demon Kindred could be. People have suggested everything from the physical manifestation of Peter and MJ's marriage, to their once-thought stillborn daughter who was spirited away by Norman Osborn, to Ned Leeds, to Harry Osborn, and even Gwen Stacy or Peter's long-dead Uncle Ben are suspect. What is your working theory for Kindred's identity? Do you think it's somebody else? Let us know in the comments. Number 3. Mephisto. Mephisto? You can say it either way, I think. Some have suspected that Mephisto could pop up in the MCU should Spider-Man 3 take a different turn. One comic book writer shared their theory of how the third film could potentially adopt a not so well-loved plot, tweaking it to make it usable, and hopefully better, in the MCU. One more day. Yeah. In the comics, this was a story where Peter randomly makes a deal with Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life. Now, what does Mephisto want? To erase MJ and Peter's marriage. What? Weirdly specific, Mephisto. In the MCU, the writer posed that Peter could meet Mephisto through a team-up with Doctor Strange and could potentially make a deal with him in order to help out the Doctor. Mephisto instead would ask that Peter's memory be erased from the world, both as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. To protect his loved ones, Tom Holland's Spider-Man would of course be fine with this and accept this sacrifice. This would allow Peter Parker to leave the MCU if necessary without much question, freeing him up to appear in more Sony films in the future. In this future, it was theorized that Peter Parker might then adopt the name Ben Reilly and try to do good and fight baddies on the down low, so as not to nullify the deal made with Mephisto. Mephisto? Number 2, Norman Osborn. I've talked about Norman Osborn and my desire to see him in the MCU before, but there is more and more evidence piling up with each movie that we've seen to hint that this theory could very much become a terrifying reality. Not a terrifying reality for Osborn fans, of course, but for Spider-Man, it could end up being very bad. Some people even think he might be the mastermind helping to fund JJ's modern Daily Bugle, and even that he might have been the one to purchase the Avengers Tower. He could also potentially be the mystery buyer alluded to in Ant-Man and the Wasp. All this means that he could even be the new big bad for not just Spider-Man, but for the entire MCU. What could be scarier than that? And for our top spot, it's time to take it to that bad type of scary. This theory is about the comic limited Spider-Man series written by J.J. Abrams and his son Henry. This one's scary because the writing in it is questionable. And we still have 2 issues left. Ooh, how will we handle these last 2 issues? Is there any way for this series to be redeemed? The story is about Peter Parker's young son Ben, who has manifested powers similar to his father, but was raised by a very patient Aunt May, as Peter had abandoned him after the death of MJ, who was obviously Ben's mother as well. The supposed death. They thought she was dead, but they didn't know. The end of issue 3 leaves us on a cliffhanger with a goofy old Tony Stark, adult Ironheart, young angsty Ben, and his sassy friend and maybe soon-to-be girlfriend Faye Ito heading out to try and save Peter, who is being held captive and being kind of used as a weapon by villain Cadaverous. But they are interrupted when there is an explosion and they are confronted by the old dead Avengers, reanimated and integrated with tech, obviously working for Cadaverous. The comic ends with the promise that there is no winning, only Cadaverous. Oh boy. So the theory for what will happen in the long-delayed issue 4 of 5, 2 issues left, goes like this. Ben will be unable to save his father, but will be able to stop Cadaverous and will become a sort of new Spider-Man. He may even have to face his dead father and mother who are being controlled by Cadaverous. He may have to fight both of them. But I kind of hope instead that this comic just ends with Ben waking up and realizing this was all a bad dream. Also, I'm sorry if you really like that comic. I have been reading it. I do find it entertaining, so I will give it that. Number 10, White Rabbit. You might not think of Lorena Dodson as being a very dark villain. She's just a woman after all who's obsessed with Alice in Wonderland and basically turned to a life of crime because she was bored. Her greatest power is her wealth, which allows her the gadgets and goons she needs to be a supervillain and a criminal. However, during the Absolute Carnage tie-in, Symbiote Spider-Man, we get a little side story involving a man who once wore the symbiote suit unknowingly that also features Dodson. In it, she ends up aiming to scare the man who is actually a judge that condemns her in court after being a witness to her causing a public disturbance and assaulting civilians at a local burger joint. Her scare attempt, however, results in the death of the man's son, who goes into cardiac arrest. The whole story is pretty dark. Number 9. Morbius. Morbius isn't always a Spider-Man villain, but he did start out in the comics that way. Although he is more of a neutral figure inherently, his pseudoscientific vampirism and bloodthirst often put him in the villain category, and put him in conflict with none other than Spider-Man. Which I also kind of get, considering that the first time they met, like most old school comics, they had some miscommunication which led to a fight between Morbius, the Lizard, and Spider-Man. And during the fight, everyone seemed to miraculously discover they needed the other's blood to become cured from their ailment. And so the blood wars began, and the stealing and baiting of blood would become a common trope for the sometimes villain known as Morbius. He's like a blood bandit. He loves to steal that blood. Number 8. Tombstone. Some might think that Tombstone is some kind of zombie or Frankenstein's monster type villain just based on his look. While Lonnie Lincoln was later on mutated by exposure to a chemical, which granted him superhuman strength and durability, previous to this, he was actually just a crime boss with albinism. In fact, it was likely all the teasing that he suffered as a child due to his condition that likely encouraged him to become an indomitable criminal, filing down his teeth to appear more intimidating. His dark, grim, yet striking appearance is also a result of the time period in which he was introduced. Tombstone made his first appearance in the Web of Spider-Man series in 1988. He's definitely got a very 80s villain look. Number 7. Sauron. We've talked about the dark tragedy that is Morbius' existence, and now it's time to talk about another monster villain of Spider-Man's rogue gallery, Sauron. Carl Lycos was bit by pteranodons from the Savage Lands while on an expedition with his father. These bites would cause Carl to transform later on, causing him to need to drain the life energy of others in order to survive, basically turning him into an energy vampire. But from there, his story would only get more strange and tragic. While siphoning energy from a mutant, he underwent a further transformation, turning him into a hybrid creature, part pteranodon, part human. While Sauron was originally introduced as a villain during the X-Men comics, Spider-Man would face him during his time working alongside the mutants, both taking on Sauron and the team known as the Savage Mutates, and later fighting against Sauron with his own mutant class that he was currently leading and teaching. I love Spider-Man as a mutant teacher, I think it's super cute. Number 6. Kane. Kane Parker was the broken clone that Jackal brought into the world first. His first discarded attempt at cloning Peter Parker. He's also the epitome of 90s edge and darkness with his originally dark billowing locks and tattered cape. Although not specifically a Spider-Man villain anymore, when Kane was originally introduced he was very much a misguided rogue. Kane is also known for his fragile psyche and unique ability known as the Mark of Cain. Many originally thought that this ability was Kane emitting acid from his hands to burn his victims, but in reality he actually has a bunch of tiny hooks on his hands that allow him to climb, like many spider folk and actual spiders. He can use these hooks to dig into someone's flesh, making it look like he has left an acid burn when really he just dug a bunch of super tiny spider hooks into their face. Yay. Number 5. Kraven. For Kraven the Hunter, Spider-Man has always been the #1 prize. This was the inspiration for the story Kraven's Last Hunt, where it appeared that Kraven had finally captured and defeated Spider-Man by killing him. In truth, he had simply incapacitated Spider-Man, placing him in a comatose, death-like state for a few weeks. When Spider-Man awoke, he discovered that Kraven had basically been standing in for him while he was out, and it was revealed to Peter that Kraven's whole plan was to beat Spider-Man at his own game, proving that he himself was a better hero than the Spider by becoming sort of Spider-Man? In the end, Kraven felt he had accomplished what he had set out to do, and in a way also showed respect for Peter Parker's approach to heroism. Feeling that he was almost at peace with the world, Kraven took his own life, ending his legacy. Or at least this would have been a dark but meaningful end to his legacy, but instead of staying dead, Kraven would later be resurrected. Oh, comics. Number 4, Norman Osborn. Green Goblin, as he was originally known, has had a lot of different villain identities. Norman Osborn is often a criminal mastermind, and was the criminal mastermind behind the events of Dark Reign, when he was known as the leader of the Dark Avengers, Iron Patriot. He's also stepped in as a sort of alternate Carnage, believing he himself was in fact Cletus Cassidy, and has been known as the combination villain of Red Goblin as well, probably one of the most terrifying iterations we have seen of him yet as a villain. And he was also the Goblin King for a time. No relation to Madeline Pryor's Goblin Queen, by the way. But when it boils down to it, Norman Osborn is one of the darkest Spider-Man villains because he is so focused on going that extra mile just to find new and insanely twisted ways to torture Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Dude is crazy. I love it. Number 3, Kindred. This villain is pretty dark since it's been alluded to that they are a demon from hell. In life, they were someone close to Peter Parker who was betrayed by him and by Norman Osborn. They have returned to get vengeance and use demonic centipede creatures to manipulate others by having these summoned creatures crawl inside those that they wish to torment. Ick. But also not ick to house centipedes, which are lovely little creatures who feed on other house pests. We like house centipedes, but we do not like demon mind control centipedes. Yes? Except MJ maybe is a fan, as she was actually pretty nice to Kindred centipedes prior to us really knowing that they were definitely a villain out to get revenge on Peter Parker, of course. Number 2, Carnage. Sure, Kindred is a former human and current demon from hell, but Carnage is like a demon on Earth. Even disregarding the dark attachment that the Carnage symbiote had to serial killer Cletus Cassidy, Carnage recently became an even more darker villain after the Carnage symbiote appeared to die attempting to preserve Cletus during his re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere. While attempting to protect its human host, the symbiote actually burned up, and even more tragic, depending on your perspective I guess, it failed to save Cletus, who also appeared to have died on arrival. However, the Null-worshipping cult known as the Church of Darkness managed to resurrect Cletus by bonding the Grendel symbiote to him, allowing them to become a new Carnage known as Dark Carnage. Cletus was intended to be the vessel that would allow Null to awaken and return, but in order to do so he would have to collect codices from the spines of those who had previously bonded to a symbiote. I mean, dark is also in the name for this version of Carnage, but also this guy literally eats spines for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So yeah, pretty dark. Number 1, Mephisto. Of course, it can't possibly get more dark than Mephisto. When it comes to his feud with Spider-Man, or Spider-Folks for that matter, Mephisto seems to have a bit of an obsession. He saved Aunt May for Peter in exchange for his marriage to MJ, saved Miles Morales as Spider-Man's teammates in exchange for the life of a civilian that Miles had saved in that other timeline where his teammates died, and he convinced Otto Octavius as Superior Spider-Man to return to a life of villainy in order to defeat an alternate reality Spidey who was also that Earth's Norman Osborn. That's like getting rid of 2 Spider-Men with 1 stone. I like to imagine he keeps these little wins and trophies in a shrine that he has in his closet, because he is secretly the biggest Spider-Man fan ever. He even possessed Gwenpool's brother, and she's really only a small percentage related to the Spider-Verse as a sort of alternate version of Gwen Stacy mixed with Deadpool. Mephisto has revealed it's his dream to make life a living hell for all Spider-Folks everywhere. How nice. Add in the fact that he's basically Marvel's version of the devil, and you've got one twisted and dark Spider-Man villain. Possibly the most dark.